Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world. Here, we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. The cell is small and full of whispers. Not voices from the corridor, not the crash of waves against the cliff, but the same two memories, over and over, eating Sirius Black alive. Halloween, green light, a ruined house in Godric's Hollow. We know this scene. Canon has taught us every beat. James, falling. Lily's scream, a baby in a cot, miraculously alive. But in the dark of Azkaban, there is another night that won't let Sirius sleep. A quieter room. A hoarse laugh. A newborn he never got to hold. A name he never got to give. A lullaby cut short by auras who wrenched his wand from his hand before he could finish the second verse. What if Hermione Granger was never a Muggle-born at all? What if, in the chaos after Voldemort's fall, the Ministry took Sirius Black's infant daughter, erased her name from every record, and placed her in the arms of kind, unsuspecting dentists who thought adoption was simply a bureaucratic miracle? What does it mean if the brightest witch of her age was never a random miracle of magic, but a black by blood, hidden in plain sight? This changes everything. Not because pure blood ancestry makes Hermione more worthy, but because it means the war has been fighting over her life and legacy from the moment she drew breath, while Sirius lies on cold stone, shackled by Dementors and his own guilt. Somewhere far away, a baby with wild brown hair is carried in from a November rain, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, and given the name Hermione Granger. No screaming portraits, no cursed family tree, just a warm lamp in a terraced house, the smell of tea, and two muggles who fall in love at first sight with a child they don't understand, but already want to protect. We hold those images side by side. Azkaban's damp, soul-sucking walls, and a nursery painted a cheerful yellow. A man who has lost everything, replaying a lullaby under his breath, until even that hurts, and a little girl growing up believing she is ordinary, until the day letters start flying through the slot. This isn't a story about swapping out one blood prejudice for another. It's a story about what happens when identity, belonging, and legacy collide with a secret the entire wizarding world was willing to bury. Because if Hermione is Sirius's daughter, she isn't just talented, she is the hidden heir to the most infamous pure-blood house in Britain. Every spell she masters, every cause she champions, every rule she breaks at Hogwarts suddenly carries the weight of an ancient name and vaults she doesn't know exist. And in that cell, as the years grind past and the Dementors strip him down to memory and instinct, there comes a moment when Sirius stops seeing only James's laughing face and Lily's last stand, and starts to remember the other loss, the tiny hands that curled around his finger for a heartbeat before they took her away. So, let's explore the timeline where Hermione Granger is really Hermione Black, where her father escapes prison not just for revenge or godson, but for a daughter who has been living a lie. What does it cost to rewrite a child's life in order to protect or to control the wizarding world? And what happens when the truth finally walks out of Azkaban and comes looking for her? Not just a fun twist, Why Hermione Black changes the whole war. Hermione Granger walks into Hogwarts in canon with second-hand robes, Muggle parents, and a chip on her shoulder the size of the British Library. She is an outsider twice over. Not just Muggle-born, but a girl who decides that if she can't inherit power, she'll outstudy it. Now imagine that same 11-year-old, same hair, same hand in the air, except the goblins already know her signature, except her name on their books isn't Granger at all. Because that's the pivot of this timeline. In canon, Sirius goes from Godric's Hollow to Azkaban with no trial, no questions, no paperwork anyone intends to look at again. Here we ask, what if the Ministry paused? What if, in the scramble to lock away a Black, they discovered a far more inconvenient problem? A newborn daughter, legally his, magically his, and therefore a future heiress to one of the oldest pure-blood houses in Britain. They can't parade her. They can't acknowledge her without admitting they imprisoned her father without due process. And they absolutely can't risk a Black heir growing up in the shadow of Voldemort, ripe for recruitment. So they do what corrupt governments always do in this story. They disappear the problem. A quiet adoption, respectable Muggle dentists who wanted a child, a modified birth certificate, a sealed wizarding file, and a polite fiction that Hermione Jean Granger simply appeared in the world with no ties to the most noble and ancient house of Black. She grows up safe, loved, and well-educated, but completely severed from the vaults, properties, and ancient magic that should have been hers from birth. This changes everything. Not because it makes Hermione secretly special in a wish-fulfillment way, but because it exposes how fragile wizarding blood politics really are. The Ministry gets to avoid scandal. The Black Tapestry quietly burns Sirius's name and pretends the line has withered to a mad cousin and a deranged Death Eater. Voldemort loses a potential pure-blood pawn before he even knows she exists. Meanwhile, Hermione builds her entire identity on being Muggle-born. Every time Malfoy sneers, every time she says with absolute conviction that blood doesn't matter, she is arguing against a system that would have claimed her as one of its own. This isn't a story about upgrading Hermione with a secret title. It's about taking the very logic that oppressed her and turning it in on itself. What happens when the brightest witch of her age discovers that the label she wore as a badge of defiance was, in part, a lie someone else wrote for her? And then there are the practical stakes. An acknowledged Hermione Black means control of Grimmauld Place doesn't hinge on a fragile godfather's will. It means Creature's loyalty, bound by blood and tradition, could swing toward the girl who campaigned for house elf rights without knowing one was magically hers. It means Black family magic. Words, heirlooms, maybe even the protections that kept Regulus alive long enough to defy Voldemort, suddenly sit in the hands of a girl who believes power is for protecting people, not hoarding it. Once the truth emerges, the Order can't just see Hermione as Harry's clever friend. The Death Eaters can't just see her as a mudblood to be eliminated. She becomes a symbol, a legal problem, a tactical asset. And in a war where symbols and assets decide who lives, that revelation doesn't stay personal for long. So, let's explore what it means when the girl who weaponized books is handed a disgraced family name, a house elf, and the keys to a dark ancestral home. And everyone, friend and enemy alike, has an opinion about what she should do with them, from bookish Muggle-born to hidden Heiress. Reframing Hermione's story, Hermione Granger walks into Hogwarts believing she has to earn every inch of space she takes up. What if, beneath that frizzy hair and timetable color-coded to death, there's a different truth entirely? A girl whose magic doesn't just follow instructions, it surges, ancient and instinctive, as if old black wards are humming quietly under her skin. In canon, Hermione's defining move is over-preparation. She memorizes the textbook before term starts. She does extra reading for fun. She raises her hand not once, but every time. That's not just ambition, that's a Muggle-born survival strategy. She knows she's entering a world that says she doesn't belong, so she armors herself in rules, in answers, in being undeniably, unarguably useful. When McGonagall gives her the time turner, the logic is clear. This is the girl who treats responsibility like oxygen. But because this timeline makes her a hidden black, that same pattern suddenly looks different. Imagine first-year charms. While other students struggle to swish and flick, Hermione's feather doesn't just twitch. It soars, the spell snapping into place with a precision that feels eerily familiar, as if her wrist has done this for generations. In ancient runes, she doesn't only learn symbols, she dreams them. Protection arrays, blood wards, the geometry of old magic. What if it all comes a little too easily, as though the House of Black has been tutoring her from the grave? This changes everything about why she clings to rules. Canon Hermione trusts authority because it's the only scaffolding she has. The ministry may be flawed, Hogwarts may be chaotic, but the system is at least legible, and she can excel within it. In this AU, the moment she learns she is Hermione Black, a name scrubbed from that infamous family tree, every institution she relied on becomes suspect. The ministry that stole her heritage, Dumbledore, who knew more than he said, even Hogwarts, which taught her the law without ever mentioning how easily the law can erase a child. This isn't a story about a secret princess finally getting her tiara. The deprivation here isn't money. The Grangers give her a warm house, new books, and the gentle, ordinary love of parents who attend every school play and ask about every exam. Their quiet constancy is her moral compass. What she was denied is context, a history, a name, a sense of where her power comes from. When she realizes she was deliberately hidden, not lost, not forgotten, but placed, there's a different wound. Not no one wanted me, but someone decided who I was allowed to be. And that reframes her heroism. In canon, we praise her brain plus grit. The girl who brews polyjuice at 12, who time travels to save Buckbeak, who walks into the Department of Mysteries because her friends need her. In this AU, we have to ask, how much of that ferocity is an unconscious rebellion against the script written for black heirs? Every time she stands up for house elves, is she, without knowing it, spitting in the eye of her own ancestral politics? Every time she sides with Muggle-borns and blood traitors, is she rewriting the black motto in real time? So, let's explore the emotional knot at the center of this. When she finally sees Hermione Black burned into that tapestry, or its absence, a scorch mark where her name should be, does she feel like an imposter in both worlds? Too Muggle for the purebloods, too pureblood for the Muggle-born experience she's lived? Or can she forge a self that is both, the dentist's daughter who still flosses, and the pure-blood heiress who can command ancestral wards with a word? The war will force that choice. The question is, Who does she decide she's fighting as, and who is she fighting for? Mapping the timeline, how Hermione Black ripples through all 7 books. So to answer that, we need a map, not just of feelings and identity, but of time. What if we walked the entire canon timeline and watched year by year how the secret of Hermione Black is created, buried, and finally detonated? We begin before Hogwarts in the wreckage of 1981. Sirius is arrested, the Blacks scramble to erase their shame, and somewhere between ministry corruption and pure-blood panic, an infant disappears into the Muggle world. This isn't a story about a simple adoption. It's a cover-up. It means forged records, obliviated healers, and Dumbledore quietly noting that the brightest witch of her age has a wand that sings a little too strongly for a supposed Muggle-born. Year 1, we stay close to canon, but we tilt the floor. Hermione Granger still arrives with big teeth, bigger books, and an almost aggressive belief in rules. But because there is black blood in her veins, the 3rd floor corridor feels wrong to her in a way she can't explain. Old magic hums against her skin as they pass Fluffy. The stone isn't just a puzzle, it's her first unconscious brush with the kind of ancestral wards her birthright should command. Year 3 is where inheritance starts to whisper. The Time Turner isn't only about academics, it's the ministry handing a black heir a device that bends time while ancient pure-blood laws are quietly updated in back rooms. We'll track how that year's canon crises, the Boggart, the Patronus, the Shrieking Shack, gain a second layer once Sirius looks into Hermione's face and sees, for a heartbeat, someone he recognizes without knowing why. By year 5, the Department of Mysteries becomes the Crucible. Prophecy, lineage, and war all collide in those spinning rooms. This changes everything. Not because the prophecy itself is different, but because the girl racing through the Hall of Prophecy is unknowingly tied to another dark family tapestry on the wall at Grimmauld Place. When Sirius falls, is he dying for Harry's godfather, or for the daughter he's only just begun to suspect he lost? Along this path, relationships will shift in stages. Hermione and Sirius move from strangers to uneasy allies at Grimmauld Place, to something painfully close to father and daughter as clues accumulate. Snape catches a black look in her eyes during occlumency and has to decide what to do with that knowledge. And Hermione and Harry, their friendship bends as power and secrets start to flow both ways. The chosen one and the hidden heiress who can legally dismantle half his enemies. Structurally, we'll move year by year, crisis by crisis. Each school year gets its own cluster of scenes, sorting reimagined with the hat-tasting black magic, the Shrieking Shack as a near-miss revelation, the Triwizard Tournament, with Hermione navigating pure-blood politics she doesn't know she owns, Grimmauld Place as a haunted home that might be hers, the Battle of Hogwarts fought under banners that could bear her name. So, let's explore this whole timeline with one guiding question. By the final battle, when the old world lies in ruins, who stands there? Hermione Granger, Hermione Black, or someone entirely new, forged in the fire of both names? Stolen Children and Silent Ministries. The dark cost behind the AU. If Hermione Black is a possibility, then someone had to steal Hermione Granger first, not with a wand in a dark alley, but with parchment, procedure, and a smile that never quite reached the eyes. This isn't a story about a single crooked official slipping a baby out the back door. What if the theft of Sirius's daughter is exactly what the Ministry thinks it does best, protecting the public and preserving the narrative? They've already branded Sirius a mass-murdering traitor. So when a healer at St. Mungo's quietly notes a black family birth in the aftermath of Godric's Hollow, how hard is it to say, this child must be safeguarded from her father? How easy to argue that preventing another black from swelling Voldemort's ranks is an act of mercy. And beneath the rhetoric, there's petty vengeance. Sirius rejected pure-blood expectations, ran away from Grimmauld Place, joined the Order. For the old guard in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, this means he spat on everything they were raised to revere. So when his newborn appears on their desks, she becomes a convenient lesson. You defy your family. You lose your family. Permanently. But because this is the wizarding world, the mechanics of that cruelty are dressed up as bureaucracy. A sealed birth certificate, filed under a restricted classification that only a handful of unspeakables and senior clerks can access. Hospital logs at St. Mungo's quietly amended so that one baby black becomes a stillbirth on paper. A healer whose conscience pricks at the change, brought in for a standard debriefing and walking out with a slightly fuzzier memory and a slightly heavier coin purse. From there, the problem is simply processed. A wizarding liaison in the Muggle liaison office shuffles her case into a neat stack of special adoptions, pairing her with a nice dentist couple in Crawley. No mention of Azkaban, no mention of blood curses, black vaults, or the fact that war might someday arrive in their living room. On the form, she's just an infant in need of a home. On another, hidden form, she's a security risk successfully neutralized. The human cost is enormous, and that's the point. A baby stripped of her name and crest before she can even focus her eyes. A godfather in Azkaban, pacing his cell, feeling a hollow where the idea of future family should be, but with no memories to attach it to, because the system never bothered to record them. A Muggle couple cradling their new daughter, believing they've simply been blessed, never warned that the Dark Lord's followers might one day trace a bloodline straight to their front door. This changes everything narratively, because the secret doesn't just sit there. It becomes leverage. As long as Hermione's true parentage is buried in Ministry archives, anyone who uncovers it holds a weapon. Fudge's administration could dangle recognition of her status to control the brightest witch of her age. Death Eaters could use her as a symbol of black restoration or as a hostage to break Sirius. Even Dumbledore, with his chessboard mind, has to decide, does revealing the truth protect the war effort, or does a hidden black heiress serve the Order better? So, let's explore the uneasiest question this timeline raises. If the Ministry can rewrite one child's life this completely, what else has been edited? How many other disappearances, conveniently explained deaths, or neat little Muggle adoptions are actually scars the wizarding world has agreed not to see? And when Hermione starts pulling on that thread, what unravels first? The lie about her name, or the entire official story she's been taught to trust? The Granger's kitchen table. Why love, not blood, makes Hermione. So before we talk about vaults and heir rings and ancient magic waking up in Hermione's veins, we have to go somewhere much smaller. A yellow-lit kitchen, a wobbly table, the faint, ever-present smell of toothpaste and tea. This isn't a story about a girl raised beneath a tapestry of burn marks and Latin mottos. It's about a girl whose first alphabet is learned off toothpaste boxes, while her parents argue, gently, wearily, about appointment schedules and ethics boards. In the Granger house, medical journals slide into piles beside fairy tale paperbacks, and 6-year-old Hermione is under the table. Not misbehaving, but reading, absorbing, listening. What does she hear? Not bloodline, not destiny. She hears words like consent, prognosis, informed choice. She hears her mother refuse to recommend a procedure without explaining the risks. She hears her father say over and over, "It has to be the patient's decision." That's the background noise of her childhood. The kettle whistling, pages turning, and 2 dentists quietly insisting that power must always answer to the person in the chair. This changes everything. Not because it cancels out the black blood she doesn't know she has, but because it means that long before Draco Malfoy sneers mudblood, Hermione has already internalized a different hierarchy. Not pure blood over Muggle-born, but evidence over superstition, consent over coercion, questions over orders. When McGonagall arrives with a letter and a cat that isn't just a cat, Hermione's first instinct isn't awe at authority. It's a barrage of questions. What if this is dangerous? What are the rules? Where is the handbook? Being raised outside wizarding aristocracy means her first experience of a waiting room is the NHS, not St. Mungo's. She learns that authority can be challenged by a second opinion, that you can complain, that systems are meant to serve people, not the other way round. Instead of a family tree that erases the unworthy, she has a family photo album where the receptionist from the practice and the neighbour's toddler are all in the Christmas pictures, pressed in beside grandparents and gap-toothed school photos. Pattern interrupt. Imagine the Black family seeing that album. No crests, no Latin, just everyone equally smudged with gravy. So when Hermione later walks into a world where names open doors and close minds, she doesn't come as a blank slate that pure blood ideology can write on. She comes preloaded, already principled, already loved, already convinced that knowledge is for sharing, not hoarding, that rules are negotiable when they hurt people, that family is who shows up, not who appears on a tapestry. And that's why the revelation matters. When the name Black finally lands in her lap, it doesn't create her. It collides with her. What happens when a girl shaped by consent discovers she is heir to a house built on coercion? When blood says, "Protect our legacy," and upbringing says, "Protect the vulnerable," which voice wins? So, let's explore the moment those 2 timelines meet and what Hermione chooses to carry forward from each world, from analysis to story, stepping into Hermione's first signs of magic. To answer that, we have to stop talking about Hermione in the abstract and actually walk into a room with her. So, let's explore. Not the Hogwarts library, not Grimmauld Place. Not yet. Let's stand in a perfectly ordinary semi-detached house in Surrey, late 1980s, in the Granger's living room, the day everything quietly, irrevocably tilts. It's a Tuesday. It's raining. Because of course it is. Hermione is 8, knees tucked under her on the sofa, a library book already finished at her side, and another open in her lap. The television murmurs in the background. Ignored. Her parents are in the next room, arguing softly about whether she reads too much, whether friends will come eventually, whether bright is enough to protect a child who never seems to fit. Hermione blinks down at a paragraph that won't quite resolve in her head. The words are clear. Her mind is sharper than most adults. But something in her chest is restless, pressing, as if the world is too small and too loud and not arranged correctly. What if this isn't just cleverness? What if the wrongness she feels isn't about being top of the class, but about the way reality itself sits on her skin? In canon, accidental magic is messy, almost comedic, hair growing back overnight, a pane of glass vanishing at the zoo. This isn't that. This isn't a story about a funny mishap that will make a charming anecdote later. This is focused. This is old. The light bulb above her flickers once, twice, then it explodes, a sharp pop and shower of glass that never quite hits the floor, hanging in the air as if time has forgotten what comes next. Hermione's eyes go very, very dark, pupils blown wide, and every book in the house answers, not just the ones in the living room, the dental journals in her father's study, the cookbooks in the kitchen, the paperback novels by her mother's bed. All of them shudder, then lift, then come streaming through doorways and down the stairs, pulled by a gravity that has nothing to do with planets and everything to do with blood. They orbit her, a whirling galaxy of paper and ink, pages riffing in a wind that doesn't exist, titles flashing past, biology, mythology, lore, fairy tales. Hermione doesn't scream. She doesn't even flinch. She just breathes once, and the circle tightens, neat and controlled, as if some deep, inherited instinct is measuring distance and velocity and risk. In the doorway, Mr. and Mrs. Granger freeze. First there is fear, because what are you supposed to feel when your child is at the center of a storm that no science can explain? Then awe, slow and terrible, as they realize she isn't being hurt. She's directing it, without words, without training, without even meaning to. Mr. Granger takes a step forward. Hermione? His voice shakes. The books pause, hovering. A paperback drifts close enough to brush his sleeve, and he flinches, but he doesn't run. This changes everything, he thinks, without having the language for magic or wards or ancient houses. It means their daughter is not just clever. She is dangerous in a world that does not have a category for this. Mrs. Granger meets his eyes over the spinning constellation. There is a whole conversation in that look. We can't tell anyone. We mustn't make her feel wrong. We protect her, even from what we don't understand, especially from that. Upstairs, a framed family photo rattles on the wall. Miles away, in a house Hermione has never seen, something older rattles too. Deep in the dust and gloom of number 12, grim old place, the Black family tapestry stirs as if in a draught. Threads that have been dormant for years pulse faintly, tracing the line from Dorea to Charles to James to Sirius. A nearly invisible offshoot, a hairline crack in the embroidery where no name has ever been stitched, glows a soft, insistent gold and then fades. In the bones of the house, wards designed to recognize black blood flicker, confused, as if they've heard a voice through a closed door. Hermione doesn't feel that. What she feels is the sudden, overwhelming urge to stop before her parents are frightened beyond repair. The orbit slows. Books settle gently onto carpet and coffee table and sofa cushions, not one of them torn. The suspended glass drops harmlessly into a neat pile on the floor. She looks up, breathless. "I'm sorry," she says, because that is what good children say when adults look shaken. Mrs. Granger crosses the room and gathers her into her arms, holding her too tightly, as if love alone could be a shield. "You're not sorry," she whispers into Hermione's hair. "You're extraordinary." And in that moment, an unspoken decision crystallizes. Whatever this is, they will not let the world make her ashamed of it. They will not let anyone take her away. Surrey, late 1980s. A girl who thinks she's just strange, whose parents have quietly chosen secrecy over surrender, whose magic has already brushed against a house she doesn't know exists. The timeline has begun to bend. It just hasn't told her its name yet. The Hogwarts letter and the missing name. A sorting hat that hesitates. When the letter comes, it does not simply drop through the slot and onto the Granger's doormat. It arrives with a knock. Emma opens the door to find Professor McGonagall on the step. Robes impeccably pressed, lips thinner than usual. We know this woman from canon as stern but fair. Here, there's an extra tension in the set of her shoulders, as if she's walked into a problem she can't yet name. Because when Hermione's name appeared on the Hogwarts rolls, Hermione Jean Granger, something else flickered behind it. A ghost entry, a warded record, a name the castle knew and could not quite speak. What if Hogwarts itself recognizes black blood even when the Ministry pretends not to? McGonagall's wand hand twitches once as she explains magic to the Grangers, as she watches Hermione's eyes go wide with hungry comprehension. This isn't a story about a professor calmly collecting a Muggle-born. This is a retrieval with questions baked into it. Why does the quill that records magical births insist on correcting itself, ink bleeding for a second toward Hermione Black before the Granger's surname reasserts itself? Why does Minerva feel absurdly as though she is escorting a secret under Fidelius? On the lake, the first years huddle in the boats, lanterns swinging. Canon gives us Harry's oar. Here, we widen the frame. Hermione leans forward so far that the hem of her jumper nearly skims the water, cataloguing every tower, every reflection, and somewhere far away in a dark London townhouse she has never seen, the Black family tapestry stirs. Imagine it, a woven branch scorched where Sirius's name was blasted away, quivering, threads that should have extended, marked with a child's birth, straining instead toward the north, toward the castle. No name appears, no neat golden Hermione, but the magic in the silk remembers inheritance, remembers promise, and pulls. This changes everything. Not because the tapestry can act, but because the house itself is waiting, half aware that its future has been diverted to a boat full of 11-year-olds. Inside the Great Hall, the Sorting Hat sings its usual warnings about unity and division. But when it drops over Hermione's curls, the song becomes a murmur only she can hear. Well, well. Cunning buried under conscience, it muses. Old magic in your veins, and a name someone has tried very hard to hide. Hermione freezes. What name? She has spent her childhood believing she is just clever, just strange, just loved. The hat, of course, has no obligation to explain. It only has to decide. Slytherin would hone you, it presses. Ambition, discipline, a certain heritage. You could change the story from inside the serpent's den. She thinks of snakes and villains in her Muggle books, of heroes who run toward danger, not away. She's already read about Gryffindor, about courage and chivalry, and somewhere deep down, without knowing why, the word black makes her flinch. Legacy whispers Slytherin. Love and choice whisper otherwise. Gryffindor, she insists silently. Please. The hat sighs, ancient and amused. Another one lost, it thinks privately as it shouts, Gryffindor, to the hall. The Blacks do shed their lions, don't they? And this one may yet save them all, or doom them completely. We leave Hermione crossing to the Gryffindor table, unaware that a tapestry has gone still, but an old house has quieted, and that somewhere, in a prison built on despair, a man who thinks he has lost everything is about to feel a tug in his bones he cannot explain. Year 1 rewritten. The Philosopher's Stone and the Blood of Black. Year 1, then, becomes our first real test of what this hidden bloodline means. On the surface, canon seems intact. A bossy Muggle-born, a bespectacled boy, a red-haired best friend, a troll, a stone. But what if the library itself reacts to the name Hermione Black, written nowhere, and yet pulsing in her veins? What if the shelves of Hogwarts, steeped in old magic and older prejudice, know exactly who has just walked between them? Hermione's obsession with the library is still there, but it isn't just academic hunger. Certain sections feel warmer to her fingertips. The spines of books on warding theory and ancestral magic hum when she passes. She tells herself it's imagination, that everyone feels this drawn to knowledge. But because we know the timeline has shifted, we can watch the way her hand hovers again and again over the same leather-bound volume. Most ancient and noble houses of Britain. She lingers on the Black family entry without understanding why. The script is elegant, the tree intricate, the motto chilling. She feels a strange pressure in her chest, as if she's arrived late to a conversation that has been going on for centuries without her. Why does the name Sirius leap out at her when there are dozens on the page? Why does she trace it once with the tip of her quill before snapping the book shut, cheeks burning, as though she's been caught reading someone else's diary? This isn't a story about Hermione suddenly becoming a Slytherin heiress. It's about how buried truth leaks through in the smallest choices. When the trio goes down to the stone, that truth surfaces in the fire. Canon gives us the logic puzzle and the black flames. Here, the moment stretches. Hermione doesn't just read Snape's riddle. She feels the pattern of the ward beneath it. Old black training would have taught her to unpick hostile protections, to slip through fire and blood. She's never had those lessons. And yet, the way she moves is almost ritualistic. She circles the bottles, murmuring under her breath, not just solving a puzzle, but acknowledging a structure, as if greeting an equal. When she steps toward the flames, the magic hesitates. Wards layered by Dumbledore and the Founders taste her lineage. Black by blood, Muggle-born by record, Gryffindor by choice. A ward meant to repel dangerous families prickles along her skin, scanning intent. Is this child a threat to the stone or a shield? The fire flares green for a heartbeat, then softens, letting her pass with a sensation of being weighed and, grudgingly, accepted. On the other side, Quirrell feels it. Voldemort, pressed like a curse against the back of that trembling skull, notes the disturbance. The Muggle-born girl should not read wards like that. She should not smell of old magic and iron oaths. For a moment, his attention flickers from Harry to her. Who are you, little mudblood who isn't? This changes everything, not because Voldemort learns her secret now, but because curiosity is its own kind of mark. After the chaos, after chess and fire and mirrors, Dumbledore walks the corridors alone. He has felt the way the protections flexed around Hermione. Hogwarts is his ally. Its wards whisper to him. A repulsion charm keyed against certain dark lines stuttered, then stood down. That should be impossible. So he goes to his office, to a locked drawer, to an old ministry registry of births and guardianships he was never meant to keep. The quill that wrote those names was charmed to record blood as well as intent. He runs a finger down the page, past Potter, past Weasley, until he finds it. Female born September, black by blood, sealed by order of Bagnold's ministry. Hermione Jean Granger. The parchment reads, in a careful, retroactive hand. Means the ministry's secret child has just walked into his school under a false name. Means the war that's coming will not just be about a boy and a prophecy, but about a girl whose very existence could crack an old house in half. So let's explore what happens when Dumbledore decides, for now, to keep that page to himself. Dumbledore's files and Fudge's fear. Who knows Hermione's truth? Dumbledore closes the file, but the knowledge doesn't vanish with the snap of a folder. It sits behind his eyes when Hermione raises her hand for the 15th time in Transfiguration. It hums in the wards when her magic brushes Hogwarts for the first time. Because if anyone in this timeline knows what it means to hide a child inside a new name, it's Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. As Chief Warlock and Headmaster, he has seen the sealed memorandum. An unnamed black infant diverted to Muggle care under emergency war provisions, signed off in a flurry of fear the week Sirius Black went to Azkaban. Maybe he didn't orchestrate it. Maybe he arrived after the fact, parchment already smoking with Fudge's signature and Crouch's ruthless quill. But he read it, he filed it, and 11 years later, Hermione Jean Granger walks into his school with that same birth date, that same approximate description, and magic that hits the castle with the weight of an old house waking up. So what does he do with that? This isn't a story about a Dumbledore who doesn't notice. It's a story about a Dumbledore who notices and hesitates. On one side, a girl thriving with loving Muggle parents, untouched by the Black family's poison, unknown to Death Eaters who would salivate over a black heir raised outside their control. On the other, the lie. The theft, the knowledge that every year he lets this stand, he is complicit in a ministry crime against both a child and a family he once swore to protect. His moral calculus bends the way it always does, toward the war. Revealing Hermione means challenging the ministry, destabilizing pure-blood alliances, perhaps even freeing Sirius years earlier and detonating the fragile narrative that keeps a frightened wizarding public calm. Keeping her secret means one more brilliant mind on the chessboard, unburdened by black expectations, free to become the brightest witch of her age without a crest on her robes. This changes everything, and he knows it. He chooses, for now, to change nothing. At the ministry, the choice looks colder. To Cornelius Fudge, Hermione isn't a person. She's a liability in a locked drawer. Her file represents illegal custody transfers, tampered records, and the horrifying possibility that a black heir, raised Muggle-born, could one day walk into Gringotts and ask very inconvenient questions. If her identity surfaces, it doesn't just embarrass the Ministry. It threatens to unravel deals with old families, to give Sirius Black a legal claim to child and fortune that makes his supposed betrayal politically unbearable. And then there's Snape. He isn't shown the file. He doesn't need it. What if, in first-year potions, when Hermione corrects him with that precise, clipped diction, something inside him flinches? Not because she's a know-it-all, but because the angle of her wand, the sharp flash of temper when Ron pushes too far, the way her magic feels in the air for a split second, controlled, volatile, familiar, tugs at memories of Sirius dueling in a Hogwarts corridor, of Regulus whispering theories about ancient runes in the library. He can't prove it. He doesn't even want to. But because he has spent years watching the Blacks destroy themselves, he watches Hermione more closely than canon ever required. A half-second pause before taking points. A harsher word than necessary because distance is safer than recognition. Which means that, from the very beginning, Hermione is walking through Hogwarts like someone dancing on a trapdoor, arguing about house elves and homework schedules while political explosives are wired beneath her birth certificate. Dumbledore knows there's a charge. Fudge knows there's a charge. Snape feels the floorboards creak. And above them all, the House of Black is still, for now, pretending it hears nothing. The question is, how long can a trapdoor stay closed when the castle itself remembers whose child you are? Year Two's chamber, Year Two's legacy, parcel-tongued, pure bloods, and a hidden heiress. The first crack in that trapdoor isn't a prophecy or a will reading. It's a slur shouted across a muddy Quidditch pitch. In canon, mudblood hits Hermione as a personal insult. Here, it hits something older. She flinches, hand tightening on her wand, not only because it's cruel, but because some buried, nameless part of her magic recoils. The word is wrong. It does not quite fit her, even as it cuts her. Malfoy is parroting a creed that would have called a daughter of the House of Black sacred, while despising everything she believes about justice, choice, and love. This changes everything because the insult lands on two identities at once: the Muggle-born girl she thinks she is, and the pure-blood heiress she doesn't know she's betraying. Watch what she does next. Hermione does what Hermione always does. She goes to the library. But because this Hermione is brushing unknowingly against her own erased history, her research into Salazar Slytherin and the Chamber of Secrets takes a sharper edge. She doesn't just read Hogwarts, a history. She chases citations into older, dustier corners where the ink has begun to brown and the margins are full of cramped notes in a familiar, spiky hand. Pattern interrupt. The book she opens isn't about Hogwarts at all. It's a Black family commentary on the founders. There, in between pompous Latin and curses on blood traitors, she finds something chilling. The Blacks condemn Slytherin's weakness for leaving. While admiring his purity of vision, they retell his story as if it's their own, misunderstood, noble, persecuted by lesser wizards. For the first time, Hermione sees how pure-blood families mythologize themselves, how they turn cruelty into tradition and prejudice into destiny. She thinks she's studying them as an outsider. In reality, she's reading her great-grandparents' theology. And then the basilisk comes. Canon gives us a clean mechanic. Direct gaze means death, reflections mean petrification. Here, we keep the rules, but we linger on the moment. When Hermione rounds that corner with the mirror clutched in her hand, the serpent's eyes snag on her for a heartbeat too long. It's as if something in her core answers back. Healers at St. Mungo's will later mutter that her magical pathways look unusually resilient, that her recovery curve doesn't quite match the others. No one connects that resilience to generations of carefully curated black blood, to wards and rituals meant to protect our own from dark magic turning inward. While she lies frozen, another kind of rewriting is at work. Tom Riddle's diary is literally editing Ginny's memories, sliding into the gaps, telling her who she is and what she's done. The adults call it possession. Hermione, once she learns the full story, will recognize something else. Institutional gaslighting in ink. This isn't a story about just one cursed object. It's a mirror of her entire life. A ministry file, a forged birth record, a decision to place a black heir with muggles and never speak of it again. Someone has been editing Hermione Granger from the moment she was born. So let's explore what that means for legacy. When she fights for Muggle-born rights this year, when she spits the word mudblood back with clinical precision, when she decodes Slytherin's motives and refuses to let blood define worth, she believes she's speaking from the margins of wizarding society. Later, when Granger and Black collide, every essay, every late-night research session in the restricted section will curdle into irony. She wasn't just dismantling Slytherin's legend, she was dismantling her own inheritance. And the castle, which has been watching its hidden heiress argue with its oldest ghosts, is not going to forget that when the chamber opens again, this time, in the hearts and halls of a brewing war. The prisoner and the daughter, Sirius escapes, memories awaken. The castle remembers. Azkaban does too. While Hogwarts quietly adjusts around its hidden heiress, miles away in a sea-battered fortress, a different kind of memory clings like frost. Sirius Black survives the way only a Gryffindor raised in a Slytherin house can, through sheer spiteful will and one stubborn blurred image the Dementors cannot quite reach. Not just James's laughter, not just Lily's eyes, a baby's cry, thin and furious, and the bone-deep knowledge that someone took his child before the cold could take everything. This isn't a story about a man clinging only to his innocence. It's about a father clinging to a half-erased lullaby. We're used to Canon Sirius holding on to the thought, "I didn't do it," as a shield. Here, there's a second shield, more fragile and more dangerous. I had a daughter. They hid her. That thought is irrational in the way grief often is, but because it is tethered to love instead of rage, it gives him just enough self left that the Dementors can't hollow him out completely. So when Fudge, smug and oblivious, hands over the prophet with the Weasley holiday photo, the shock comes in layers. First, the rat on the boy's shoulder, the impossible recognition of Peter Pettigrew's beady eyes. That's the jolt Canon gives us. But watch. Sirius's gaze snag on the background, on one bushy-haired girl, not posing, mid-turn, eyes sharp, assessing the photographer even through cheap wizarding ink. Something in him lurches. He doesn't have a name for it. He doesn't remember the bundle whisked away from a cursed townhouse. or the unsigned adoption papers shuffled through a corrupted ministry office. He only knows that this face hurts to look at, the way an old wound aches before a storm. This changes everything, even if he can't articulate why. What if, when he slips through the bars and into the sea, he isn't just chasing a rat? What if the animagus dog swims with two instincts snarling in his chest? Hunt the betrayer and go to the place where that almost familiar girl is. Hogwarts becomes more than a battlefield. It becomes a lodestone. Something of his is there. Someone. And back at that castle, Hermione Granger is fracturing herself across time. The time turner digs grooves under her eyes. Too many classes, too many timelines, her schedule pulled so tight it might snap. She is everywhere and nowhere. Arithmancy, ancient runes, Buckbeak's appeal, Harry's firebolt, Ron's homework. You watch her and you can feel the theme humming. A girl stretched thin between expectations and an invisible inheritance. This Harry raised in a different web of love, still leans on her, still trusts her to organize chaos. But because she is unknowingly a Black, magic clings to her in ways even McGonagall can't quite explain. The time turner hums hotter on her skin. The castle corridors bend a hair more eagerly when she runs. On one of those nights, when Gryffindor collapses into exhausted sleep after yet another Quidditch upset and yet another essay, the common room embers burn low. In the shadows beyond the portrait hole, a great black dog waits, then shifts. Sirius stands where he can see them through the crack, the red heads, the scar, and her. Hermione, brow furrowed even in sleep, one hand still on a book. His gaze catches, held for a heartbeat too long, something in his chest snarling recognition without language. He almost steps forward. He almost remembers. Instead, the fat lady stirs in her frame, and the moment shatters. By the time she blinks awake, the shadows are empty, the corridor cold, and the father who nearly saw his daughter is already gone, racing toward a different confrontation that will drag all these half-memories into the open. But not yet. First, the Shrieking Shack has to reopen its doors. The Shrieking Shack rewritten. You look like someone I lost. The shack is breathing again. Floorboards creak, dust motes spin in the wand light, and we step into a moment you think you know. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Lupin, Sirius, all wands and adrenaline, and 12 years of betrayal pressing in on the rotten walls. But because this is a different timeline, there's an extra presence in the room, something no one can name yet. It lives in the way Sirius keeps looking at Hermione. Not glancing, staring. Canon gives us a half-mad fugitive, all sharp bones and singular purpose, eyes fixed on Peter Pettigrew. Here, he still wants the rat's throat. He still snarls, still explains the Fidelius, still throws those barbed lines at Snape. But between every sentence, his gaze flickers back to the girl pressed close to Harry's side, the bushy-haired witch who keeps calculating angles, who keeps defending her friends, who feels, to him, like déjà vu given flesh. This isn't a story about Sirius Black, the reckless godfather. Not anymore. It's about what happens when the man Azkaban could not quite hollow out is trapped in a room with the one person the Ministry stole from him and told him was dead. He doesn't know that consciously. Not yet, but his magic does. When the explanations are done, and the truth about Scabbers hangs in the air like smoke, we reach the pivot you remember. Sirius lunges for Pettigrew. Lupin at his shoulder, vengeance and justice braided so tightly they're indistinguishable. Harry is shouting. Ron is sprawled on the bed. And Hermione, of course, is the one who moves. What if we handed him to the Dementors? She begins, stepping between predator and prey, just as in canon. Only this time, when Sirius jerks to a halt, it isn't just Harry's voice that stops him. It's distance, proximity. The way the light from Lupin's wand catches her face. He sees her eyes. For a heartbeat, the shrieking shack vanishes. He is 21 again, arguing baby names with a woman who will not live to see any of them. He joked about old black family names. She'd thrown a cushion at his head and said, "Absolutely not, Sirius. If we have a daughter, she'll have her own name. Merlin," he whispers now, the word torn out of him. "You're mine." The room freezes. Harry's hand tightens on his wand. Lupin's head snaps around. Even Snape, half-conscious, stirs. Hermione blinks, more offended than afraid at first, because what does that even mean? But Pettigrew hears it too. Of course he does. "Black Skirl," he wheezes, eyes going wide with a new, oily kind of calculation. They hid Black Skirl with the Muggles. That's the pattern interrupt. In canon, this is a straight line towards execution interrupted by the full moon. Here, the line shatters early. Sirius's grip slackens. Lupin hesitates, mind suddenly racing through dates and headlines and Dumbledore's careful silences. And in that sliver of uncertainty, Peter does what Peter always does. He runs. He blasts free, leaves blood and splinters, and the echo of that phrase, "Black Skirl," ringing in everyone's ears as he escapes into the night to carry his new leverage back to Voldemort. The chaos drains slowly. Lupin is the first to really look at Hermione, not as Harry's brilliant friend, not as the Muggle-born who raised her hand too often in his classroom, but as a timeline problem. Hermione Jean Granger, born September 79. Adopted, Dumbledore had mentioned, so casually, a war, a lost black heir, a baby no one ever found. This changes everything, his expression says, even before his mouth can form the words. Hermione feels it too. The floor of her identity tilts. The neat story she's told herself about who she is, Muggle-born, outsider, self-made, suddenly doesn't balance. What if her magic isn't an accident? What if the black family tree she's read about in passing is not just history, but inheritance? Harry reaches for her hand. Family, he thinks, is who you choose. But because the war is coming, blood will matter in ways they don't yet understand. So, let's explore what happens when the brightest witch of her age walks out of the shrieking shack with a new question burning in her chest. Who am I, if I've always been someone else's secret? Time turns and tangles, buying hours to process a shattered identity. The world jumps. Not just because a girl and a boy and a werewolf have rewritten the script in the shrieking shack, but because a little hourglass turns and suddenly Hermione has more than time to save. She has time to think. And what do you do when the timeline gives you 3 extra hours and a question that could undo your entire childhood? Canon tells us this time-turner loop is about Buckbeak and Sirius, about justice delayed and narrowly reclaimed. But in this version, every click of sand means something else. Every backward step through the grounds is Hermione buying minutes to process the possibility that the man in the tower, the one everyone calls mad murderer, might be her father. This isn't a story about clever puzzle solving anymore. It's a girl hiding inside borrowed hours, trying to decide whether she wants her life to change. She oscillates. Of course she does. One moment it's denial, cold and efficient. Impossible, she tells herself as she drags Harry behind a hedge. She's Muggle-born. Her parents are dentists. Her file says so. Forms mean safety, and Hermione Jean Granger has always trusted the written word. The next moment, she's pattern matching with the same ruthless precision she brings to arithmancy. The temper that flares white-hot when she sees injustice. The magical intensity that lets her master a third-year curriculum before breakfast. The instinctive distrust of authority that makes her argue with Snape, with McGonagall, even with Dumbledore when the logic doesn't add up. Through the lens of Black, all of it rearranges itself. What if those aren't just quirks? What if they're inheritance? The time turner gives her cover. While past Hermione and past Harry race to the hospital wing, this Hermione pulls Harry in the opposite direction, up toward a quiet rooftop ledge overlooking the tower where Sirius waits. Or maybe it's the edge of the Forbidden Forest, trees hemming them in while the castle glows in the distance. Either way, the point is distance. Temporal, physical, emotional. From here, hidden by time itself, she can watch him. She studies him the way she studies everything. The restless pacing, the way his hands twist in the chains, not just afraid, but furious at the idea of being caged again. The sharp, reckless humor that flashes even when he's cornered. Does she recognize herself there? Or is she forcing the resemblance because the alternative, a life stolen, a past erased, is too terrifying to contemplate? Because this changes everything. Not just the rescue, but what the rescue means. In canon, she is saving an innocent man for Harry's sake, for justice, for the principle that the Ministry can be wrong. Here, it might also mean she is saving the only living link to a past that was taken from her before she could form words, much less questions. She isn't just protecting a falsely accused godfather. She might be protecting her own blood, her own name, her own place in a family tree that has always pretended she doesn't exist. And suddenly, when Buckbeak's wings beat against the night and Sirius clings to the hippogriff's feathers, the moment is heavier. Harry sees freedom. Hermione sees distance. He is free, but he is flying away from the one person who needs answers more than anyone. She could shout. She could stop him. She doesn't. Because what would she even say? Sirius Black vanishes into the dark, a speck against the sky, and the time turner's sand runs smooth and indifferent. Hermione is left on the rooftop, heart hammering, with a question no book can solve and no timetable can control. Who am I, really? And what happens to this fragile, borrowed piece if the truth finally catches up to the girl who has been living under the wrong name? Letters never sent. A summer between Grangers and ghosts. The rooftop disappears. The time turner becomes a memory. And suddenly we're in a very different battlefield. A small, neat bedroom in Crawley, where the loudest sound is the scratch of a Muggle ballpoint pen. Hermione sits at her childhood desk, sun striping the wood, a half-finished arithmancy chart shoved under her maths revision. In front of her, 3 pieces of paper, 3 beginnings of 3 different lives. 1 letter to Sirius, 1 to Dumbledore, 1 to her parents that starts in shaky blue ink. There's something I haven't told you about who I am. How do you explain to the people who taught you to read that your name might be a lie? How do you tell the man the Ministry calls a mass murderer that you watched him fly away and wanted to shout, "Wait! Are you mine?" This changes everything. Not because blood is automatically more important than the years she spent as a Granger, but because once you ask, "What if I'm someone else's child?" every other certainty starts to wobble. She writes to Sirius first, "Dear Mr. Black," then crosses it out so hard the paper tears. "Dear Sirius," then stops. Because what does that mean? Father, fugitive, both. The letter spills out anyway. Questions about the shrieking shack, about why he looked at her so strangely, about whether he ever knew a witch who gave up a baby. By the time she reaches the bottom of the page, the light overhead flickers twice and hums louder. She doesn't notice. Not yet. The letter to Dumbledore is sharper. Hermione lists dates, impressions, what she overheard in the hospital wing, the way his eyes lingered on her when Sirius spoke. She asks, politely but relentlessly, what protections exist around certain children of certain families. The bulb above her desk pops with a tiny crack. On her bookshelf, a row of library books shivers and slides, rearranging themselves into a branching pattern. She turns just in time to see titles stagger into place. Blackstone's Commentaries, A History of Magic, Bloodlines of Britain. A coincidence, she tells herself. It has to be, because if it isn't, then her magic is answering a question she hasn't dared to say aloud. So, let's explore what Hermione does when she can't sleep and can't ask. She researches, quietly, methodically, the way other teenagers scroll television schedules. Muggle adoption law first, downloaded articles hidden behind chemistry notes, consent, sealed records, emergency placements after parental imprisonment. Then, by Owl Order Catalogue, wizarding equivalents, guardianship charms, blood adoption rituals, ministry override clauses for politically sensitive wards. What does it mean when you realize the institution you've been raised to trust could have signed away your entire life with a signature and a seal? This is where her later skepticism of ministry authority really begins, not in Umbridge's pink office, but at 12:30 on a July night, reading that the Wizengamot can, in exceptional circumstances, erase a child's legal parentage. And through it all runs the quieter fear. If she is Sirius's daughter, does that make the Grangers less her parents? Does black blood make her less Muggle, less Granger, less herself? She pictures the tapestry Harry described from Grimmauld Place in canon, all scorched names and proud, cruel faces, and imagines her own name embroidered there in silver. Hermione Black. It feels wrong in her mouth. It feels inevitable. Pattern interrupt. What if she told them now? We can pause the timeline and imagine it. Hermione walking into the kitchen, hands shaking, saying, "Mum, Dad, I think I was stolen." The Grangers dropping their coffee mugs. A flurry of solicitors and social workers. Dumbledore forced into the open months or years ahead of schedule. But because she is Hermione, and because she has been taught that evidence matters more than fear, she doesn't. She folds the letters to Sirius and Dumbledore into smaller and smaller squares until they're almost painful in her palm, then feeds them to the kitchen bin under a banana peel. The letter to her parents she tucks into the back of her desk drawer, behind old birthday cards, where the words, "There's something I haven't told you about who I am," can wait. For now, she decides, they don't need to know. Not until she has proof. Not until she can protect them from what the truth might bring. And that single, silent choice, that delay, means when the truth finally does erupt, it will cut through 2 families instead of 1. Fire, goblets, and blood wards. Year 4 starts asking questions. Secrets don't stay politely in desk drawers when there's a blazing blue fire in the middle of your school. By October, Hogwarts is humming with the Triwizard Tournament, and the Goblet of Fire sits in the Great Hall like a challenge and a warning. Names, contracts, destinies, all reduced to slips of parchment and a line of hopeful students. Canon tells us this is about Harry's name leaping from the flames. But because this Hermione is carrying a hidden house on her blood, the magic notices her too. She isn't entering, of course. She's lectured Harry and Ron 6 times about the age line and the dangers of binding contracts. Yet when she edges closer to drag them away from Fred and George's latest scheme, something happens. The blue-white fire stutters. The flames lean just slightly toward her. Not toward her face, toward her wand hand, toward the pulse in her wrist. Hermione freezes. Breath caught. For a second, the goblet burns higher, threads of silver chasing through the blue as if tasting the air around her, as if tasting her. Then it settles, indifferent again, and she tells herself she imagined it. The adults do not. At the staff table, Dumbledore's fork pauses midway to his mouth. McGonagall's lips thin, eyes narrowing behind her square spectacles. He glances at her. She flicks her gaze from Hermione to the goblet and back. It's a conversation in a heartbeat. Did you see that, Albus? Yes, Minerva, and we will not discuss it here. Hermione, debating the ethics of magical tournaments with Harry, misses all of it. We don't. This isn't a story about a random quirk of enchanted fire. In this timeline, the goblet is older than most European ministries, and ancient families have woven their protections and priorities into its runes for centuries. The Blacks were not just rich, they were meticulous. Their ward makers carved inheritance magic into the bones of wizarding society, into Gringotts keys, into Wizengamot seals, into any artifact that might one day decide who counts as a champion, an heir, a sacrifice. So when the goblet's flames flicker around Hermione Granger, what if it's those old black spells brushing against her, quietly disagreeing with the name she wears? Magic that recognizes blood before paperwork. Magic that remembers the House of Black, even when the world pretends it's dying out. Months later, that question about names follows her into the Yule Ball. She spends hours on her hair, her dress, the careful transfiguration of herself into someone who won't be overlooked. When McGonagall announces the champions and their partners, the sound rolls through the hall. Hermione Granger. Applause. Surprise. A few mutters from purebloods who still think Muggle-borns don't belong at the center of the story. And in the middle of that noise, she imagines another version of the introduction. Hermione Black. The syllables are heavier, edged with history and scandal and power. It would mean a vault at Gringotts, a tapestry in Grimmauld Place, a family she's never met, claiming her in front of everyone. she both craves and fears it. Because if she is Hermione Black, then every cause she's chosen, house elves, Muggle-born rights, challenging blood prejudice, isn't just rebellion, it's defiance of her own legacy. Later, on the balcony where the music is softer and the air is cold against her flushed skin, Victor Crumb studies her with that thoughtful, quiet intensity. "Your magic," he says slowly, searching for the English. It feels old, not new Muggle-born, old family, very old. He means it as a compliment. It lands like a prophecy. Hermione laughs it off, but the words lodge under her ribs, right beside the goblet's strange flicker and the unopened letter in her desk. Another puzzle piece that doesn't fit the picture she's been given. And the more pieces she gathers, the more dangerous it becomes, for everyone still pretending they don't see the outline forming. Rita Skeeter smells a story. The black heiress exposed, Rita Skeeter smells it before she can name it. Not perfume, not scandal in the silly schoolyard sense of love potions and jealous boys, but that metallic tang of something bigger, sealed, hidden, worth careers. Canon gives us Rita circling Harry, Hermione, and the tournament for cheap headlines. In this timeline, her quill still itches for drama, but the scent she follows isn't just a supposed love triangle. It's the faint, acrid smoke of a ministry cover-up. Because when you're an unregistered beetle animagus with a talent for being where you shouldn't, you don't just overhear teenagers bickering. You catch fragments adults would kill to keep quiet. Imagine her on a windowsill in the hospital wing, wings humming, as Dumbledore speaks in a voice tight with something very close to fear. The records are sealed for a reason, Severus. A pause, a hissed reply. She's just like him. Rita doesn't know who him is yet, but she writes it down. Later, she clings to the fringe of McGonagall's tartan robe in the corridor, listening as the deputy headmistress murmurs about the Granger girl and complications if anyone at the ministry starts asking questions. Complications. Sealed records. A girl whose magic crackles off her skin in dueling club and in the library. This isn't a story about homework and house elf badges anymore. This changes everything. So she does what Rita does best. She digs. We follow her into the ministry archives, where the air tastes of dust and old ink and forgotten lives. She isn't looking for Hermione at first. She's looking for anything that will embarrass Dumbledore during the tournament. But because the universe loves irony, she stumbles on a redacted birth registry instead. Hermione B. Date, September 19th. Parents, blacked out so aggressively the parchment has thinned. Status, sealed by special order of the Wisingamot. Hermione Granger's Hogwarts file, cross-checked in a stolen moment at the school, lists the same birthday, same height, same brown eyes in a little moving photograph. Muggle-born, it claims. Except there is no corresponding Muggle birth certificate in the ministry's Muggle liaison office. Rita checks. Twice. What if, she wonders, the most famous Muggle-born of her generation isn't Muggle-born at all? What if a pure-blood child was taken, renamed, and dropped into a dental surgery in Crawley so no one would ever connect her to a disgraced house? Now the leverage crystallizes. If Hermione B. is really Hermione Granger, then somebody in power stole a pure-blood baby and rewrote her life. In a world where bloodlines mean influence, that isn't just a human tragedy. It's political dynamite. A front-page story that could shred Fudge's carefully curated image, expose the ministry's hypocrisy to every pure-blood drawing room, and force the old families to ask, whose child might be next? Rita's early articles begin to shift. Still claws, still venom, but threaded with something more insidious. She calls Hermione's magic suspiciously advanced for a Muggle-born. She wonders, in print, about a curious lack of verifiable early records for Miss Granger, and a mysterious background that raises as many questions as her proximity to Harry Potter. She doesn't name the Blacks. Not yet. She doesn't have proof, only a hunch and a half-burned family tree she glimpsed once in Grimmauld Place as a beetle on a curtain rail. But she has enough to stir the cauldron. Readers write in. Some are fascinated. Some are furious. Some whisper that perhaps the ministry has been lying about blood and safety for years. Prejudice and curiosity braid together, wrapping around Hermione's name like a noose she can't see. And then, just as Rita is ready to push harder, to run a Sunday special on the mysterious Miss Granger, what is Hogwarts hiding, the graveyard happens. Voldemort returns. Cedric dies. Headlines explode in a different direction. The nearly finished article never sees the front page. Her editor spikes it in favor of fear, denial, and Fudge's talking points. But Rita keeps the notes, the redacted registry number. Snape's quote, the phrase Hermione B, circled 3 times in green ink. They sit in her locked drawer, humming with potential, waiting for the moment when exposing the black heiress will hurt the most. Because this story isn't buried. It's loaded, and someone, sooner or later, is going to pull the trigger. Grimmauld Place opens its doors, the house that should have been hers. The trigger is pulled in whispers and headlines. But the real impact? It walks through a front door. When the order gathers and Moody growls out the address, Hermione feels the magic before she sees the house. Number 12 Grimmauld Place doesn't appear so much as unfurl, peeling itself out from between its neighbors with a shudder that makes the pavement hum. The air goes thick, heavy with soot and old wards. And there's a smell you don't get in canon. Not just damp and dust, but iron, ash, something sharp and ancestral that hits the back of her throat and settles there. She steps over the threshold, and it's like walking into a held breath. The corridor is narrow, the wallpaper stained, and the silence lasts exactly long enough for you to think maybe the stories were exaggerated. Then the portrait screams. Wahlberger's voice rips through the house, all slurs and sanctity. And we've seen Harry flinch at this before. But because this Hermione is carrying black blood she doesn't know about, the sound does something stranger. It doesn't just repel, it resonates. There's a split second where the shriek bends, warps, not quite softening, but snagging on a recognition the canvas can't articulate. The wards feel it too. You can imagine the old magic bristling as Dumbledore's passwords and order tokens push against generations of pure-blood protections. They should reject her outright, Muggle-born, Muggle-raised, walking violation of everything the Blacks engraved into their bones. Except when Hermione passes, the pressure eases. The floorboards stop creaking for half a step. A door that stuck for Tonks slides under Hermione's hand with a grudging sigh, as if the house is arguing with itself, and for once, compromise wins. Even Creature notices. He appears with his usual muttering, blood traitors, filth, half-breeds, and then his eyes land on her. The insult catches mid-syllable. His nose twitches, ears straining forward, and for one suspended moment, he looks less hateful than bewildered. Then the shutters slam back down, and he vanishes. But the gap is there. The story has shifted. This isn't a story about a girl simply horrified by pure-blood bigotry. Hermione is disgusted, yes. The mounted heads of house elves make her stomach twist. The slurs carved into silver goblets make her fingers curl. But beneath the anger, there's an ache she can't name. When she finds the tapestry, that ache gets a shape. We remember Harry staring at that family tree in Order of the Phoenix, reading names like curses. Here, Hermione lingers. Her fingertips trace the golden embroidery, following lines from Phineas Nigellus down through Orion and Walburga to Sirius, to Regulus, to the scorched-out holes where disgrace meant erasure. The cloth is cool at first. Then, under her touch, one burned gap warms. She snatches her hand back, heart pounding. Magic shouldn't do that. Not for her. Not here. But when she reaches again, slower this time, the threads thrum faintly, as if the tapestry is a living registry, and some buried protocol is trying to reconcile what the ink says with what the blood knows. There is a space where a child of Sirius Black should be. It's empty. It's waiting. And in this timeline, that means something. In the doorway, Sirius watches. This Harry is used to seeing Sirius as a reckless godfather, all barked laughter and desperate affection. Here, we see something else layered on top. Pride at the way she stands her ground in this poisonous house. Guilt that she's confronting it at 15 instead of 5. Longing so sharp it looks almost painful. He knows what these walls did to him. He knows they were meant to protect his future children, not imprison them. And as Hermione's hand rests just once more on that warming thread, Sirius realizes that Grimmauld Place isn't just a prison or a headquarters anymore. It's a contested inheritance. A house that should have been hers, and might still be if the truth comes out before the war does. Which raises the question, who gets to decide when that truth detonates? The man who lost his daughter, or the girl who doesn't yet know she was stolen? Kreacher's bow and Bellatrix's shadow, claiming the black name. The detonation, when it finally comes, is quiet. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a firelit study in Grimmauld Place. 3 people. And a secret Dumbledore has been dodging since Hermione first set foot in his office, with 2 bright eyes and 2 precise questions. Pressed. That's the only word for it now. Sirius has the healer's report from St. Mungo's The Ministry Intake Ledger that doesn't match the Granger's adoption date, and the way Hermione's magic sings in this house that hated him. Dumbledore, for once, runs out of evasions. What if, he admits, the Ministry did steal a child while Sirius rotted in Azkaban? What if that child was placed with kind muggles because it was politically convenient to erase a black? This changes everything. Not because blood is destiny, but because in this timeline, blood is law. Dumbledore's voice is low as he explains guardianship papers falsified under Crouch's regime. A birth record sealed under the Black Crest. A quiet directive to find a suitable Muggle family. Hermione doesn't speak. She just watches Sirius, as if the ground under both of them has gone thin. Then Sirius does the one thing Dumbledore cannot control. He stands, draws Hermione with him. and marches to the ancestral portrait. Wahlberger's painted face twists in outrage. The other blacks lean in, hungry for scandal. Sirius lifts his wand, voice steady. I, Sirius Orion Black, acknowledge Hermione Jean Granger as my daughter and heir of the House of Black. Ancient magic likes clarity. The words hit the walls like a spell. Lamps flare. The floorboards shudder. Down the corridor, the woven family tapestry ripples as if caught in a storm. And in the doorway, Creature freezes. Canon Creature clung to Regulus and Bellatrix because they were what he knew: pure blood, cruel, predictable. This creature has spent months watching Hermione argue for house elf rights with infuriating sincerity. Seeing her framed by black firelight short-circuits something. No, he croaks first, shaking his head. No, she is mudblood, she is. The oath catches. His magic disagrees. You can almost feel the snap when loyalty rewires. His eyes widen, then drop into a bow deeper than anything he's ever given Sirius. Miss Hermione, he whispers, voice gone reverent and terrified. Mistress's blood. Creature will serve. It's devotion, swift and absolute. And it's awful because it comes laced with all the old black prejudices now weaponized in Hermione's name. This isn't a story about Hermione getting a convenient house elf upgrade. It's about realizing that accepting the black name means inheriting the tools they use to hurt others. Creature will spy, lie, even kill if she asks. The vaults will bankroll resistance or oppression with equal enthusiasm. Bellatrix's wandwork hums in her fingers when she duels. Narcissa's poise appears, unbidden, when she addresses a room. So when Creature calls her little mistress and offers to cleanse the House of Blood traitors, Hermione flinches. She thinks of Andromeda, of Sirius, of every Muggle-born first year she's defended. What if claiming this legacy makes her complicit in all the ways it was used before? What if by taking the name, she validates the idea that blood is what finally made her matter? The answer, for Hermione, is an act of controlled arson. She stands before the tapestry, wand raised, Sirius and Creature both watching. Bellatrix's name burns under her spell, black thread charring, the embroidered face shriveling into nothing. But because destruction isn't enough, Hermione does something the tapestry was never meant to allow. She stitches. Hermione Jean Granger Black, in clean, defiant letters, interlaces where the scorch marks cool. Muggle-born raised, traitor to the old ways, heir on her own terms. The fabric strains, then accepts it with a reluctant shiver. And as the house settles around this rewritten truth, we're left with a question that's far more dangerous than any bloodline reveal. Now that Hermione owns the Black legacy, what is she willing to do with the power it gives her? And who will try to claim her because of it? Harry, Ron, and the girl with two fathers. Friendship under strain. And of course, the first people this revelation collides with aren't the Wizengamot or the Death Eaters. They're a boy who grew up in a cupboard, a boy who grew up in a drafty Devon attic, and the girl who suddenly has two fathers and a surname that makes ancient portraits sit up and pay attention. This isn't a story about abstract lineage. It's about what happens when the emotional geometry of the trio tilts overnight. Because if Hermione is black by blood, then for Harry, Sirius isn't just godfather anymore. He's family to her in a way Harry has never had with anyone living. Harry's first reaction is almost embarrassingly bright. Sirius has a daughter. Sirius has someone else the universe didn't manage to steal. You can feel the joy spike through him in the kitchen at Grimmauld Place. That wild, disbelieving grin when he says, "You're his." You're actually his. For a heartbeat, it's perfect. And then it isn't, because this Harry who has clung to Sirius as his last living echo of James, realizes that Hermione now has a blood tie to the man he thought of as his. What if Sirius starts looking at Hermione and seeing all the years he missed, all the birthdays and report cards and first spells? What if Harry becomes the godson again? The afterthought, the boy Dumbledore parked with a convenient rebel cousin. He won't say it out loud, not at first, but it leaks in the way his face tightens when Sirius ruffles Hermione's hair and calls her kiddo, in the way he snaps, sharper than cannon, when he finds out Dumbledore knew pieces of this months before telling them. It's not just hurt that the secret was kept. It's the sense that his link to James has been quietly redistributed. Ron, meanwhile, is standing in the doorway of the drawing room, listening to a tapestry whisper about our Hermione and feeling every Weasley insecurity flare. She was already the brightest witch of their year. Now she's also the hidden heir to an ancient pure-blood house with vaults and titles and a name that makes Malfoy blink. This changes everything for him, even if she spits on what the Blacks stood for. He jokes at first. Of course he does. Trust you to be secretly posh, Hermione. But the joke curdles when he watches pure-blood traditionalists, the same people who sneer at his second-hand robes, suddenly reconsider her as an asset. It brushes up against every quiet fear he's carried growing up poor. That brilliance and bloodlines will always outrank loyalty and hand-me-down jumpers. Pattern interrupt. Watch what happens when Hermione realizes she's not just managing their feelings. She's split down the center herself. There's the Muggle dad who taught her long division at the kitchen table, who sat through school plays and orthodontist appointments. And there's the wizarding father who lost her to Azkaban and ministry paperwork, who looks at her now like every breath is a second chance. Loving one feels, in her bones, like betraying the other. If she throws herself into learning Black family magic and lore, is she abandoning the Grangers? If she clings too hard to her Muggle life, is she rejecting Sirius a second time? That's the quiet war behind her eyes in Order of the Phoenix, layered on top of exams, Umbridge, and a house that whispers in her blood. It all finally detonates in an argument that isn't about homework or occlumency, but about Dumbledore. Harry, raw from dreams and corridors and half-truths, rounds on the idea that yet again, the headmaster knew more than he said. He moved you like a chess piece. Harry spits in the Grimmauld Place hallway, voice cracking. He decided who your parents were. He decided when you were allowed to know who you are. How is that any different from what he did to me? Hermione tries to defend strategy and greater good and timelines. Ron mutters that Dumbledore always has a plan, but because the hurt is fresh, Harry can't hear it. His mistrust of authority, already growing in canon, digs deeper roots here. If Dumbledore can rewrite Hermione's entire identity for the war, what else is negotiable? And yet, the story doesn't leave them shattered there. That night, long after the shouting, we find them in the kitchen of Grimmauld Place. The house is quiet. Creature muttering far away. The only light from a flickering candle between 3 mugs of too strong tea. Hermione's eyes are red. Ron is staring at the table as if the old wood might tell him how to be enough. Harry looks between them, then at the black crest, carved into a chair back, and makes a choice. "You're still Hermione," he says, voice rough but certain. "That's who we chose. The rest, we'll figure out together." In that moment, bloodlines and vaults and prophecies fall away, and we're reminded that this isn't a story about heritage determining destiny. It's a story about 3 teenagers in a war deciding again and again to choose each other over the roles the world has written for them. But if the trio is united, and Hermione now carries the legal and magical weight of House Black, the next question is unavoidable. How will the wider war react when the brightest witch of her age walks into it not just as a friend of Harry Potter, but as the Black Heiress who can rewrite alliances with a signature? Snape sees a Black, classroom tensions with old ghosts. And if the war is watching Hermione, you can be absolutely certain that one particular pair of dark hooded eyes is too. What happens when Severus Snape looks up from his cauldrons and sees not just Granger the insufferable know-it-all, but a Black? What does it mean when, in the middle of Order of the Phoenix, the girl who challenges his every bias suddenly acquires the surname of his oldest nightmare? This changes everything, not because Snape suddenly becomes kind, but because the axis of his cruelty tilts. Once rumors begin to circulate in the staff room, once Dumbledore's careful, maddeningly vague explanation reaches him, Snape's barbs in class take on a new, almost surgical precision. His remarks about Hermione's hair, her hand in the air, her insufferable habit of reading ahead, gain a sharper, more personal edge, as if he is testing how much of Sirius he can provoke out of her. And yet, every so often, there is a pause where canon never gave us one, a swallowed insult, a deduction of fewer points than he initially intended. Because here is the problem. Hermione is, in his eyes, the child of his tormentor, the living echo of laughter in a sunlit Hogwarts corridor where he dangled in midair. But she is also the student who brewed polyjuice at 12, who will argue with him about werewolves and house elves, who refuses to accept that Muggle-borns should be grateful for scraps. In her fierce, principled defiance of blood prejudice, he hears Lily's voice whether he wants to or not. This isn't a story about Snape's redemption, but it is a story about how recognition can hurt. So, let's explore one potions lesson in 5th year as the tension finally snaps. Umbridge's notices are plastered outside. The class is brewing draught of peace. Snape glides between desks, stopping longer than necessary by Hermione's cauldron. When he takes 10 points from a Hufflepuff Muggle-born for a minor error and ignores the same mistake from a pure-blood Slytherin, Hermione can't hold it in. "Sir, that's not fair," she says, voice shaking but steady. "You're punishing them more because they're Muggle-born." The room goes silent. This Harry watches her, wand hand twitching under the table. Snape's eyes flash. "Do not presume to lecture me on fairness, Miss Granger," he says softly. "Some people," and here his gaze lingers on her face in a way that makes her stomach drop, "do not even know what they are. Yet they are very eager to speak for others." It lands like a hex. Hermione's hand falls. She doesn't fully understand the layers in his words, but she feels them, raw and humiliating. And Snape, seeing that flinch, experiences a brief, disorienting stab of something that is not triumph. Later, In Dumbledore's office, that stab becomes an order. Dumbledore explains that an acknowledged black heiress raised in a Muggle family is a target twice over, for Voldemort, who craves the old bloodlines, and for a ministry eager to parade or punish her. Snape is asked, quite calmly, to keep an eye on her. "Protect Sirius Black's brat?" he hisses. "Protect Miss Granger," Dumbledore corrects. "She is not her father." That distinction becomes Snape's new torment. In the weeks that follow, he finds himself stepping in when Slytherins mutter "blood traitor" under their breath, docking points with an almost theatrical disdain that hides the fact he is, in his own way, shielding her. He sneers at her essays, yet quietly ensures that word of her movements never reaches the wrong ears. One evening, as the class files out, Hermione lingers to ask a question about non-verbal magic. He answers with clipped impatience. She leaves, back straight, books clutched to her chest. He watches the empty doorway for a long moment. "You're not him," Snape mutters at last, to the air that still seems to hum with her presence. It isn't forgiveness, but because he says it, the black pattern is no longer inevitable. And the next time the Dark Lord asks about the girl with Sirius Black's eyes, Snape's answer will not be as simple as it could have been. The Department of Mysteries, prophecies, bloodlines, and a different loss. So when the dream of Sirius in the Department of Mysteries begins to needle at Harry's mind, the stakes are already different. In canon, it's a trap for a godfather. Here, it's bait for a bloodline. Because somewhere between Snape's hesitation and Voldemort's rising impatience, a name has been whispered. The Muggle-born girl who isn't Muggle-born at all. What if Voldemort doesn't just want the prophecy? What if he wants leverage over the House of Black itself? Pettigrew, cringing and eager, has pieced together enough. Sirius's frantic questions, a sealed adoption file, a girl with black-grey eyes, who hexed Draco Malfoy into next week. It means that when Harry and Hermione burst into the Ministry, they're not just children walking into a trap. They are prize and key, prophecy and heir. The Hall of Prophecy shatters around them, as in canon, but the voices are different. Death Eaters don't just hiss Potter and Mudblood. They call her Black's Whelp, Little Usurper, demand to know whether she'll stand with her true family or die with her borrowed one. This isn't a story about faceless evil anymore. It's about a war trying to claim her surname as a weapon. You can almost see the calculus on their masked faces. Imagine the headline: Black Heiress rejects blood traitors, joins the Dark Lord. Or, just as powerful in the opposite direction, Ancient House of Black breaks, with Voldemort through Muggle-born heir. This changes everything. Not because propaganda matters more than lives, but because both sides understand how symbols move frightened families faster than laws ever could. In the chaos, the pattern interrupt is Bellatrix. In canon, she needles Harry, all cruel delight and lazy malice. Here, she locks onto Hermione with terrible focus. Little cousin, she croons across the spinning room, curses flashing between them. Did they tell you whose bones you wear? Come, I'll teach you what it really means to be a Black. Her spells are precise. Old family hexes Hermione recognizes from Regulus's marginalia and from the darker corners of Grimmauld Place. Hermione duels back with textbook efficiency and something wilder beneath. Every shield a refusal. Of pure blood supremacy, of inherited cruelty, of the idea that blood decides who you must become. This Harry fights at her side, red hair a blur in the periphery, because being a Weasley first means you don't let your sister stand alone while someone tries to rewrite her story mid-battle. And then the moment that should have been a death. Bellatrix doesn't cast green, she casts something older. A black family binding meant to corrupt, to pull Hermione's magic into Voldemort's service by anchoring it to her heritage. Sirius sees the sigil forming in the air and moves without thinking. He takes the curse squarely in the chest, is yanked backward toward the veil, then slams against an invisible threshold and crumples instead of falling through. It's worse, in some ways. He lives, but broken and burned from the inside, a man whose very magic has been twisted toward a master he hates. Dumbledore and the Order will have to hide him, heal him, unpick ancient bindings that were never meant to be resisted. Hermione will have to live with the knowledge that her blood almost turned her father into a weapon. Afterward, in the ruined Hall of Prophecy, she stands amid the wreckage and listens. The sphere that mattered was always Harry's. That doesn't change. But because she's seen how quickly her surname became a battlefield, she understands something new. Her existence is its own unwritten prophecy. A wild card the war was never meant to have. A black heiress raised by Muggles and claimed by Weasleys. So, let's explore what happens when Voldemort realizes that the prophecy he feared might not be the only one shaping this timeline, and when the next move on the board isn't his to make. Ministry spin and pure blood panic, the political fallout of a Muggle raised black. The explosion happens the next morning, not at the Ministry, but on every breakfast table in Britain. Owls slam into windows, toast goes untouched, and 3 headlines scream from the same front page. Black heiress raised by Muggles, Ministry cover-up exposed, and, in a smaller but no less vicious font, is Dumbledore building a privet army? This changes everything. Not because the wizarding world suddenly grows a conscience, but because the scandal touches the one thing old families care about more than power, or even survival. Bloodlines. If the Ministry can steal and rehome a black child, what if they've done it before? What if they can do it again? What if no crest, no tapestry, no vault is actually safe? Fudge's camp moves first. The Prophet runs a clarification by lunchtime. Hermione was placed with Muggles for her own protection. Dumbledore interfered. Sirius was unstable anyway. It's a familiar canon pattern. Blame the dead man, smear the headmaster, imply the girl is confused. Dumbledore's allies push back through the Quibbler and whispered interviews. Forged records. Sealed trials, a pattern of convenient disappearances around inconvenient children. And in the middle of that noise, pure-blood traditionalists publish their own howlers in the more respectable journals, decrying blood treason, while quietly panicking over what the revelation really means. Because under the outrage is naked fear. In drawing rooms lined with family trees, people start asking dangerous questions. If the blacks can be tampered with, who's next? The Longbottoms, whose heir was already attacked once. The Malfoys, whose money has always brought them certainty. Some double down on Voldemort, deciding that only a Dark Lord can truly protect their sacred 28 from a meddling Ministry. Others, remembering Azkaban and Imperius trials, begin to edge away from Fudge's regime, calculating that a government that can steal children can also scapegoat families when the war turns. Hermione herself becomes a symbol before she has finished healing from the Department of Mysteries. To some, she's living proof that blood doesn't dictate loyalty. A Black who chose Muggle-born friends, Weasley family dinners, and house elf badges over pure blood privilege. To others, she's a cautionary tale, the terrifying example they hold up at parties. This is what happens when a pure blood child is contaminated by Muggle schools and toothbrushes and public libraries. This isn't a story about one girl's parentage. It's a referendum on what counts as proper magical upbringing. And then the law gets involved. The Black Vaults, already in flux after Sirius's death, become a battleground. Is Hermione the primary heir, or does her Muggle upbringing invalidate ancient magic? Can the Grangers keep guardianship in retrospect, or did they, on paper, receive stolen property when they took in a baby the Ministry had no right to relocate? In closed-door Wizengamot sessions, witches in embroidered robes talk about her as though she is a chess piece. If we recognize her claim, can we leverage black gold away from Dumbledore? If we deny it, do we drive her straight into his arms? Pattern interrupt. Somewhere in that chamber, an old, half-burned tapestry square is produced as evidence. Her name, stitched in silver beside Sirius's, glows when touched. Ancient magic does not care about Fudge's talking points. By the time she's summoned to give testimony, Hermione realizes that every argument she makes about house elves, about Muggle-born safety, about who deserves protection, now arrives wearing the black crest. Her fight has been supercharged with gold and titles and political weight. It has also been poisoned by association, and as she walks into the Wizengamot, she understands that from this point on, every change she demands will be measured against one brutal question. Is this Hermione speaking, or the House of Black rewriting the timeline? Year 6, Horcruxes, Inferi, and a Heiress with a target on her back. And then we hit 6th year, where the crest on Hermione's robes becomes as dangerous as any dark mark. Because what happens when the self-made Muggle-born hero walks into Hogwarts as the confirmed heiress of the House of Black? What if the girl who has spent 5 years dismantling pure-blood myths suddenly becomes the most politically valuable pureblood in the castle? Horace Slughorn notices before the Sorting Hat can finish its first song. He doesn't just see any WT scores waiting to happen. He sees a name. Black. Vaults, seats, history. He all but tackles her at the welcoming feast, beaming, hands fluttering, inviting her to the Slug Club with a reverence he never once offered Canon Hermione. It's not only "you're brilliant, my dear," but "your father was such a tragic figure, such a loss to our world, and the Blacks have always produced such remarkable talent." This changes everything, not because Slughorn suddenly grows a conscience, but because Hermione now understands in her bones what it means to be collected. She goes. Of course she goes. Access to Slughorn means access to memories, to gossip, to the generation that knew Tom Riddle. But she sits at that table feeling both powerful and slightly ill, realizing she is being paraded as proof that old blood can be domesticated into the new order. It's that same uncomfortable fluency in pure blood culture that sharpens the Horcrux hunt. When Dumbledore begins laying out his theory, this Hermione doesn't just nod at the words Slytherin's locket and Hufflepuff's cup. She hears legacy. She hears what any ancient family would enshrine. Founders equals, objects that scream, "I was here, and my line endures." A Black raised in hiding can look at Voldemort's choices and say, of course he wanted artifacts that make him the heir of every house he covets. Of course he turned genealogy into immortality. And Voldemort, watching the Black heiress stand beside Harry and the Prophet, notices her too. He remembers the Blacks as Death Eater royalty, remembers Regulus's betrayal, remembers Sirius's defiance. Does he erase that line entirely? Or does he capture it, re-educate it, display Hermione Black as a reclaimed prize of his new world? The war tightens around her because her surname has become a competing prophecy all on its own. So when Dumbledore takes Harry to the cave, he does not go with only a 16-year-old. He brings the girl whose blood might unlock protections Tom Riddle designed with the old families in mind. The lake is not neutral. The moment Hermione steps near the water, the Inferi stir differently, sensing black magic they were once sworn to obey. The goblet resists her touch, the potion flares, and for one terrifying heartbeat, it seems the cave will accept her as its new master instead of yielding its secret. She holds the line. She follows Dumbledore's instructions, steadies Harry, absorbs the horror without breaking. Because this isn't a story about power for its own sake. It's about a girl using a cursed inheritance to dismantle the man who worships inheritance most. And then the tower. Dumbledore falls. And for Hermione, the world doesn't just crack. The scaffolding of her entire stolen childhood collapses. She loses a mentor, yes, but also the only man who knew every forged document, every memory charm, every ministry lie that made Hermione Granger instead of Hermione Black. With his death, the last institutional buffer between her and the ministry's claims on her name vanishes. Which means as Hogwarts mourns, Hermione is already calculating the next battle, not only how to destroy Horcruxes, but how to keep the government from seizing her as an asset of the very system she's trying to overthrow. So, let's explore what it means to go on the run when the war wants your bloodline as much as your brilliance. Packing the tent and the family tree, choosing what to carry into the hunt, we cut to a bedroom full of quiet revolutions, zips, snaps, the soft thud of books vanishing into impossible space. What does a witch take when she knows she might not come back? What if that witch is both Hermione Granger and Hermione Black? Canon gives us the beaded bag as a punchline at first. Of course, Hermione packed 12 textbooks and a camping stove. Here, every item becomes an argument about identity. She folds jumpers and spare socks with the brisk efficiency of someone who has always prepared for worst-case scenarios. She tucks in Phineas Nigellus's portrait frame, shrunken and wrapped in a tea towel, because information is a weapon. And then she hesitates over one last thing, a miniature, carefully duplicated copy of the Black family tapestry, its threads compressed and preserved by intricate charms she taught herself in secret. This changes everything. Not because the tapestry is sentimental, it isn't, but because she's choosing to carry the record of a house that tried to erase her twice. Once by denying her existence, and once by planning to weaponize it. She slips it into the bag anyway. If she survives, she intends to annotate it, to cross out names, to write in new ones, to prove that bloodlines are not destiny, but drafts. And then we reach the scene that never stops hurting. obliviate. In this timeline, the spell is the same, but the loss is doubled. She isn't just erasing her parents' memories of their clever, exasperating daughter who left books on every surface. She is severing the only unconditional, non-political family tie she has ever known. The Grangers never cared that she's secretly a Black. They cared that she needed braces, that she read under the covers, that she cried when the cat died. So when she stands behind them in the living room, wand trembling, the question isn't only, can I do this to protect them? It's, who am I when the only people who loved me without a vault or a surname no longer remember me? This isn't a story about a girl choosing between worlds. It's a girl burning the bridge to the only world that never asked for proof. Because in this version, she doesn't leave without a blessing. If Sirius is alive but in hiding, or if it must be Lupin, patched and weary, there is a stolen hour in a safe house that smells of dust and old magic. Sirius, who once ran from that tapestry, looks at the copy she's made and almost laughs. "You're really taking that?" he asks, half appalled, half impressed. She lifts her chin. Someone in this family has to start writing corrections. He tells her what it means to be a Black who walks away from supremacy and still claims the name, who fights not to redeem the family, but to make sure no child is ever stolen by it again. Lupin adds the quieter truths, that love is a choice repeated daily, that found family is not second best. Between them, she receives something she has never had from any adult with Black blood: explicit permission to be both daughter and rebel, heir and saboteur. Harry watches this from the doorway or hears about it in fragments, and the guilt carves new channels through him. This Harry knows what it means to be claimed by a family and to fear losing it. He sees Hermione methodically dismantling her Muggle life, feels the weight of an ancient fortune and a cursed surname she is willing to put at risk for his mission. How do you say thank you to someone who is gambling 2 entire worlds on your survival? So when the three of them finally step out with the tent on Hermione's back and the beaded bag bumping against her hip, she is carrying more than pots and protective enchantments. She walks into the wilderness with 2 surnames in her heart, and no guarantee she'll return with either. Will she come back a Granger in secret again? A Black in public? Or something entirely new that terrifies the Ministry even more? The war is about to decide, and the first Horcrux is only the beginning of what those names will cost. Camping with a crest. How being a Black changes the trio's dynamics on the run. Out in the cold, it should be simple. 3 teenagers, 1 tent, 1 impossible mission. But what if one of those teenagers is legally the heiress of a house that owns vaults, estates, and magic older than Hogwarts itself? This changes everything about what on the run could mean. Because in this timeline, Hermione doesn't just have a beaded bag and a timetable. She has theoretical access to Black family vaults, to hunting lodges in the Highlands, to a warded townhouse in Paris that once hosted Grindelwald sympathizers. There are keys she could claim, signet rings that would open doors, portraits that would be compelled to protect their lady. On parchment, the trio's flight doesn't need to involve freezing nights, stale bread, and a radio that barely works. And yet she refuses, not because she is a martyr, but because she is a strategist who grew up a Granger. Every Gringotts withdrawal leaves a trace. Every reactivated Black property stirs old wards that report to old allies. In a war where Voldemort is hunting Harry Potter and any leverage around him, a sudden spike of black family magic flaring back to life, that is a beacon. So she chooses the tent. She chooses hunger over hot meals in a Cornish manor that might already be compromised. This isn't a story about easy virtue, though. Ron, already brittle from Horcrux poison and the slow erosion of hope, watches Hermione turn away from safety he can almost taste. In his darkest, most exhausted moments, resentment finds a new shape. "You're rich," he spits one night, rain hammering on the canvas. "You're rich, and you're still acting like you're one of us. You could end this, and you're choosing to rough it, to prove a point, to prove you're better than purebloods." The words land because they hit both names at once. Granger, who has always defended house elves and Muggle-borns. Black, whose ancestors would have agreed with every slur Ron ever heard in the Great Hall. Hermione hears all of it and still says no. She could hide in an ancestral estate, wrapped in inherited wards, and let the war play out around her. But that would mean accepting that bloodline magic is a shield she's entitled to, while others die. Pattern interrupt. The war doesn't care about her principles. One night, they wake to the tent walls, shuddering, air thick with unfamiliar pressure. Not snatchers, not random patrols, Death Eaters, casting for black signatures, following a thread of ancestral magic that has been humming faintly around Hermione since the will reading. A detection net, keyed to the House of Black. Harry pulls her down as a curse sears overhead. It isn't her books or her Muggle-born status that nearly kills them. It is her surname. After Ron leaves, that knowledge hangs in the air with the smoke of his disapparition. Hermione, shaking, tells Harry she could walk into a black safe house tomorrow and vanish from the timeline. Harry, this Harry who has always measured family by love rather than blood, looks at her and says, "Then we don't. We're not doing this because of who sired us. We're doing this because of who we're choosing to be. Here, now, in the mud." They tighten the wards on the miserable little campsite, share the last of the soup, and recommit. Not as a Potter and a Black, not as symbols on a tapestry, but as two teenagers choosing again to protect each other without the safety their names could buy. Malfoy Manor, Bellatrix's obsession and Creature's revenge. We cut hard from mud and thin soup to marble and shadow, from a miserable little campsite to the polished cruelty of Malfoy Manor. What happens when the girl who just chose who she wants to be is dragged straight into the house that insists she's something else entirely? Canon gives us Hermione on the floor, a mudblood under Bellatrix's wand. Here, the moment she's thrown down, the room stills. Bellatrix doesn't ask who she is. She laughs. Low, delighted, deranged. "Little cousin," she purrs, and you can feel the word land like a slap. What if the woman who carved that slur into Hermione's arm knew she was carving it into a black? This changes everything. Not because the pain is worse, but because the torture becomes a lecture, a family seminar in blood supremacy delivered with a crucio for punctuation. Bellatrix circles her, ranting about inheritance clauses and sacred 28 contracts, about how Sirius wasted the line and the ministry stole his get. She spits that Hermione should have been raised in Grimmauld Place, fed on pure blood doctrine and elf obedience, not rotted among dentists and television. And in that manic monologue, we and Hermione hear the ideology under the madness. Bellatrix lists cousins burned off the tapestry, vaults sealed until a proper heir claims them. The quiet ministry deals that kept inconvenient children out of the profit. This isn't a story about one unhinged aunt. It's a syllabus on how deeply the Black obsession with blood has shaped the whole timeline. But because Hermione has spent a year learning what Black means from Sirius and from the house itself, she isn't just a captive. She's a very specific kind of threat. When Bellatrix shrieks at the mention of the sword, Hermione doesn't only scream. She stalls. She invokes old formulas she's read in Black ledgers. By right of the eldest living line, by the will of Arcturus, she uses the exact phrasing that makes Bellatrix hesitate, because somewhere under the mania, those customs are law. And then there's Creature. Canon Creature is bound to the house and to its darkest memories. Our Creature has been rebound painstakingly to Hermione as mistress. So when Narcissus snaps for him, or Bellatrix orders him to fetch more knives, he flinches, but he doesn't obey cleanly. House elf magic tied to the Black line pulls in two directions. He can't defy the family outright, but he can misinterpret, delay, twist. So he appears where he shouldn't, muttering, eyes bright with a strange, fierce pride. He nudges a dropped wand just out of a Death Eater's reach. He redirects a ward so Dobby can apparate inside. He answers Bellatrix's demand for confirmation with the most literal truths possible. Buying seconds, Hermione turns into survival. Hermione, shaking, uses those seconds. She calls Creature our elf. She invokes the old guest right of a Black under another Black's roof, an obscure custom Bellatrix can't quite bring herself to violate without more proof. And in that crack, the rescue slams through. Ron, Harry, Dobby, chaos. She leaves Malfoy Manor bleeding, but not as only a victim. She has looked directly at Bellatrix and seen the future she was meant to inherit. A life where family means ownership, where love is conditional on blood purity, where power exists to crush. And she walks away having said no, explicitly, to Bellatrix's face. So, let's explore what it does to a girl to reject her birthright in the very hall that claims her. Because the war isn't done with Hermione Black, and the next time ancient magic calls her heir, she won't be on the floor. The question is, who else heard Bellatrix call her little cousin? And what will they do with that knowledge? The final battle, a Black standard over Hogwarts ramparts. Who else heard? We asked. In this timeline, the answer arrives with a roar of fiend fire in the room of requirement, and with whispered owls that never reach their targets. By the time the trio push through the tunnel from the Hog's Head into the battered heart of Hogwarts, Hermione knows eyes are on her bloodline as much as on Harry's scar. So she makes a choice. In canon, Hermione's badge is Prefect, then Potterwatch Conspirator, then Nameless Soldier. Here, she reaches into the beaded bag and draws out a small square of black silk, edged in silver, the Black crest, but altered. The serpent, painstakingly unpicked over months on the run, is gone. In its place, she has embroidered a phoenix in flight, its wings breaking the circle of the old motto. House Black, literally refusing to remain within its own borders. She pins it to her robes, where a prefect's badge used to sit, and meets Harry's eyes. This isn't a story about bloodlines as shackles. It's about who dares to rewrite what blood means. This changes everything. Not because a crest wins a war on its own, but because symbols are shortcuts to courage and to rage. As they move through the castle, you can feel the ripple. Slytherins who had been edging toward the dungeons to wait this out catch sight of that familiar silver threadwork and freeze. If the Black Heir is standing with Potter and Weasley, what does neutrality even look like now? A few peel away from the retreating crowd, drifting toward the defenders, with faces that say they haven't forgiven the system that raised them, but they're done being its weapons. Death Eaters, on the other hand, see it and snarl. One masked witch rips off her mask just to scream that the Black Line is dead, that Bellatrix was the last true daughter. And in the corners of the battle, older purebloods, McKinnon cousins, Pruetts by marriage, those ancient families who never quite went marked but never quite resisted. Straighten. If even the House of Black has broken ranks, then the fiction of pure blood unity shatters. Hermione uses that fracture, because growing up Granger gave her theory, but growing up Black, once she claimed it, gave her keys. The castle is layered with old pure blood wardwork, repulsion webs meant to keep muggles and undesirables from the grounds, ancestral alarms keyed to sacred 28 surnames. She reads the stone with wand tip and arithmancy, feeling the way black magic hums in her bones. And she does something no one expected of a supposed Muggle-born. She repurposes it. Whispered family cantrips, half remembered from Regulus's annotated notes and Sirius's drunken stories, lace through her more modern ward theory. A boundary that once would have hurled a Muggle to the pavement instead flares into a shield that recognizes intent, not blood. Parents in Muggle clothing, DA members with one magical grandparent, even goblins from Gringotts who came because Harry asked. They pass through untouched, while curses from outside skid and fizzle against exclude them. And of course, blood comes to claim her. On a shattered staircase, she meets a cousin. A Lestrange or a Rosier, it hardly matters, which branch of the poisoned tree. He spits that she is betraying her name, that Sirius shamed them all and she is worse. Hermione's answer is steady. She is not betraying the Blacks. She is fulfilling the only part of that legacy worth salvaging. The part that ran away at 16. The part that walked into Voldemort's service only to turn back at the last moment and die trying to fix it. Sirius, Andromeda, even Regulus, whose locket hangs against her ribs as she speaks. When Voldemort falls in the dawn light, Harry's story closes one circle, but because Hermione chose to walk into this battle wearing her crest, another circle breaks. Dust and blood spatter the black silk on her chest, streaking the silver thread, but the phoenix is still visible, wings outstretched over the rubble of the old order. The House of Black will exist in the new world, the image promises. Only now, it will stand watch on different ramparts, under different terms, and the war for what that means is only just beginning. Aftermath and inheritance. What it means to own Grimmauld Place now. The war ends with a bang, but inheritance arrives with parchment, seals, signatures, and a silence in the Wizengamot chamber as an ancient quill finishes scratching Hermione's full, contested name. What does it mean when the brightest witch of her age is not just a war heroine, but head of the House of Black? This changes everything. Not because gold in Gringotts vaults can magically repair trauma, but because in this timeline, power is suddenly wearing Muggle jeans and still double-checking her arithmancy. With Sirius dead, his will unsealed, and his formal abdication of the title reversed by new evidence, the Wizengamot has to confront a legal paradox. The House of Black has an heir, and she has been fighting on the wrong side of their old ideology since she was 11. We can imagine the hearing. Augusta Longbottom's approving nod. Malfoy's thin-lipped fury. Kingsley, now minister, reading the wording that names Hermione Black Granger as Lady Black, with full voting power and control over properties, vaults, and the old family seats on key committees. This isn't a story about a girl who marries into influence. It's about a witch whose birthright arrives after the battle, when she finally has time to be horrified by it. And then there's Grimmauld Place. Not the dim, choking house we remember from canon, but something in between mausoleum and convalescent home. Post-war, Hermione walks through number 12 in daylight for the first time. Curtains drawn back, dust motes whirling in honest sun. The troll leg umbrella stand is gone. The screaming portrait is an empty frame, waiting for new wards and a different definition of family. What do you keep when every object is a history lesson and a potential curse? She moves room by room, wand out, mind cataloguing. Ancient runes texts that predate Hogwarts go into a carefully warded trunk for the Department of Mysteries. Dark artifacts, cursed opals, a music box that lulls you toward permanent sleep, are tagged for destruction, not because they aren't fascinating, but because she's seen too many bodies on too many stone floors. Some heirlooms, though, she sets aside for museums. Tapestries that chart blood purity obsessions. Regulus's notes in the margins of Black family grimoires. Quiet evidence that resistance grew in poisoned soil. The money is worse. Growing up middle class in the Muggle world means she still flinches at the idea of old family gold. What if taking it makes her complicit? But because she is Hermione, she turns discomfort into policy. The Black Fortune begins to move. Endowments for Muggle-born legal aid, a fund for house elf rights in Creature's name, scholarships for war orphans, reparations for families whose homes were destroyed by Death Eaters whose names once glowed proudly on that cursed tapestry. Pattern interrupt. Pause on Creature himself. Old now, ears drooping, but eyes clear. He serves tea in the brightened kitchen to Hermione and a cluster of Weasleys. Molly fussing over the sandwiches, George making some too loud joke that everyone lets stand because grief needs somewhere to go. The house that once spat out blood traitors now shelters them as honoured guests. And Creature, who once muttered slurs, corrects Ginny's cup with a soft "Mistress prefers extra sugar." It's domestic, ordinary, and quietly revolutionary. And still, number 12 stands in Muggle London, hidden but not gone. In the final image of this section, Hermione stands in the open doorway, warded of course, but open, watching buses roar past, people hurrying with coffees and briefcases, unaware that a war and an ancient title sit 10 feet away. She feels both worlds tug at her, the bloodline that tried to own her and the childhood that taught her what ownership should mean. She could close the door, retreat into pure blood privilege and safety. She doesn't. She leaves it open, a deliberate choice to let the Muggle heir into a house that once tried to choke on it, and to stand as a bridge between timelines, between names. between the world that raised her and the world she now unavoidably leads. Granger versus Black, reconciling two childhoods that never coexisted. But what does it actually mean to live with the door open between two childhoods that were never allowed to coexist? What happens when the war is over, the dust has settled, and Hermione is left alone with a surname that rewrites her origin story and a set of memories that refuse to be overwritten? This isn't a story about Hermione waking up one morning and feeling seamlessly black. It's about the long, uneven, therapy-shaped work of admitting that both stories are real and both hurt in different ways. We can imagine her at Andromeda Tonks's kitchen table, tea cooling between them, asking, almost accusing, was I supposed to grow up here? In this world? With these people? Andromeda, who fled that same tapestry, has to answer yes and no. You were supposed to grow up loved. The rest is politics and tragedy. Other days, it's Kingsley, now minister, who becomes an unofficial counselor. He listens while she spits out the contradictions, that she fought a war as a Muggle-born, only to learn she was pure blood, that she dismantles oppressive laws using the very black legal weight that once enforced them. He doesn't fix it. He names it, "You have two origin stories." That doesn't make either of them fake. It just means the ministry lied about the binding. And because magic doesn't answer everything, we can absolutely see her in a discreet Muggle therapist's office, hands twisting in her lap as she tries to explain what it means to erase your parents' memories for their safety, then restore them and say, by the way, I was stolen from someone else first. How many sessions does it take before she can say, kidnapped by the state, without flinching? The Grangers themselves are their own kind of reckoning. In this timeline, Hermione chooses to restore their memories after the war because not doing so would turn protection into abandonment. They remember Australia and the blank space where their daughter should have been. Then they remember everything before and they meet Sirius Black across a kitchen table crowded with tea mugs and ministry documents. They're dentists. He's an ex-convict, pure-blood lord. It shouldn't work, but because they all love the same girl, they make it work. Awkwardly, honestly, with questions that land like fractures. Were we enough? Are we still your parents? Overlaying all of this is guilt. Survivor's guilt that she lived when so many didn't. Guilt that the Grangers lost years with their only child. Guilt that the Black fortune funding her reforms was built on house elves, blood prejudice, and dark magic. This changes everything about how she walks through Grimmauld Place. Every creaking floorboard is a ledger line, so she starts writing new entries. Christmas at Grimmauld now includes Muggle crackers and terrible paper crowns. Diwali lamps glow under ancestral portraits. She hangs Granger family photos next to the scorched holes on the tapestry and invites Muggle-born students to stay over summers, their trainers piled beneath centuries-old coat hooks. She refuses to let the house decide whose childhoods count. And slowly, she learns to say it to herself, not as an argument, but as a truth. She isn't half Granger and half Black, divided down some invisible line. She is wholly Hermione, a witch who was raised Muggle and born Black, who chooses, deliberately, stubbornly, which parts of each legacy to carry forward into the next fight this timeline demands. The new Wizengamot, a Black vote for a different future. The first time Hermione Black walks into the Wizengamot chamber, It feels a little like walking into a mausoleum that's pretending to be a parliament. Purple robes, floating candles, the black crest carved in stone above one of the highest tiers, its silver serpents twined around a motto that has justified centuries of cruelty. How many times has that crest meant a vote to restrict, to exclude, to punish? How many children disappeared into ministry placements because an old black raised a hand and said, calmly, that it was for the greater good of their kind? This isn't a story about Hermione simply inheriting a title and a vault. It's about what happens when the brightest witch of her age sits in a chair built for blood supremacy and refuses to use it that way. Because when she takes her seat as head of House Black, she can feel the weight of every precedent pressing down on her shoulders. And then, deliberately, she leans the other way. So, let's explore what that actually means in this timeline after the war. Her first major bill isn't glamorous. It's paperwork, transparency laws about ministry child placements, mandatory records, independent oversight, a legal right for grown children to see who signed their lives away. She stands in the center of the chamber and says, very evenly, that the ministry stole her childhood. Not as a grievance, as a case study. This is what happens, she tells them, when no one has to sign their name where the public can read it. You can imagine the ripple. Whispers about the Muggle-born girl who was never Muggle-born at all, using the black vote to drag skeletons out of pure blood closets. The surviving old families, Malfoy, Nott, a scattering of lesser lines, call her a traitor to her class. They accuse her of airing family business in front of clerks and journalists. Hermione doesn't flinch. She argues with Granger logic, statistics, precedent, carefully footnoted examples of canon abuses. And then, when they're almost bored, she slips into black rhetorical flair. She reminds them that true ancient magic doesn't fear scrutiny. That power which can't survive sunlight isn't worthy of their vaunted names. It's a contrastive triplet in human form. Raised Muggle, born black, choosing something else entirely. From there, the reforms widen. Protections for Muggle-borns that make registration schemes legally impossible. The gradual dismantling of the Dementor system, replaced with secure, human-staffed facilities, and mandated rehabilitation for those who can be reached. Legal recognition for house elves and other beings, not as pets or property, but as contracted magical citizens with rights to wages, safety, and refusal. Every step meets resistance. Every hearing is a duel. They try to mock her compassion as naivety, to weaponize her growing up outside Wizarding Society as ignorance. She answers with case law, with war records, with the memory of Azkaban hanging over her father's name, and the knowledge that Dementors were once assigned to guard her godbrother's soul. And then comes the vote that changes everything. The House Elf and Sentient Beings Recognition Act reaches the floor by a hair. Speeches have been made. Threats have been whispered. When the roll is called black, the chamber holds its breath. Hermione rises, voice clear, in favor. The tally is agonizingly close. Quills scratch. Counters click. For a heartbeat, the whole room wavers between the old world and the new. Passed by 3 votes. For the first time in its long, dark history, the black name is etched beside a law that expands rights instead of restricting them. Reporters scramble. Old portraits in ancient houses hiss. Out in kitchens and common rooms, elves hear the news and don't quite dare to believe it. And in a shadowed corner of the chamber, someone else is watching Hermione's victory. Someone with their own claim to the past, and a very different idea of what the Black legacy should protect next. Friendships revisited. Harry, Ron, and the Heiress in everyday life. We cut away from the echoing chamber and its watching eyes, and drop into something quieter. The clink of plates, the low hum of a wireless, the creak of an old house that has seen too much. What does a revolution look like when the speeches are over and everyone still has to decide who's doing the washing up? At Grimmauld Place, it means Harry, Ron, and Hermione wedged around a scarred kitchen table, arguing about Quidditch formations and ministry subcommittee bylaws in the same breath. The black crest glowers from the wall, its silver threads catching candlelight, but no one is bowing to it. Ron is waving a fork to demonstrate why the cannon's new chaser rotation is a disaster. Hermione is correcting his numbers with the precision of someone who has, regrettably, read the entire League Analytics report. And Harry is trying to mediate while his tea goes cold. This isn't a story about titles devouring personality. This is a story about how, in peacetime, the grand revelations flatten into habit. There's a black family tapestry in the corridor. Yes. And once a month, Creature insists on polishing the silver in a way that would make Wahlberger proud. But because Hermione's name is stitched into that tapestry now, because her seal sits on ministry documents and Wisengamot rulings, these domestic evenings carry a strange double exposure. The weight of an ancient house and three friends still bickering about homework they finished years ago. For Harry, it changes everything and almost nothing at once. Watching Hermione navigate being a black heir forces him to reframe Sirius and James, not as legends, but as young men trapped inside the same suffocating web she's now trying to unwind. When Hermione pushes through a regulation limiting blood status questions on school forms, Harry doesn't just see a victory for Muggle-born kids, he sees the boy in the faded photograph, Sirius laughing on James's shoulder, and wonders how much of their tragedy was written by the pure-blood world long before Voldemort ever picked up a wand. He feels closer to Sirius, through her, through the way she refuses to let the House of Black define who deserves protection, through the way she snarls at old portraits with a fluency Harry recognizes. But he's also more critical now, more willing to say, in the quiet after dinner, that the system that made Sirius heir and disowned, Andromeda, is the same system that nearly broke them all. Ron's arc is quieter, but no less sharp. He still calls her Lady Black when she's being particularly insufferable about policy drafts, earning himself a cushion to the face and a lecture about due process. Yet, when a Daily Prophet columnist sneers about a Muggle-raised heiress meddling in sacred family traditions, it's Ron who answers in print and in person. He stands up in crowded hearings, drawing on a lifetime of being a Weasley in rooms that reek of old gold and translates between worlds, explaining to old families that change doesn't mean annihilation, and to the new order that not every ancient name is a Death Eater waiting to happen. In private, though, the shorthand never changes. She's still just Hermione, the girl who punched Draco, the friend who dragged them through forests and time-turners and tents in the rain. The vaults, the crest, the whispered Sirius Black in corridors, those are background noise compared to shared glances over tea when someone invokes proper bloodlines. And all three of them have to fight, not to laugh. And as plates stack themselves in the sink, and the wireless murmurs another cautious report about post-war reforms, there's a quiet truth anchoring the room. The war, the revelations, the inheritance, all of it shifted the timeline. But the core of their friendship remains the same stubborn choice it was at 11. Family is the people you keep choosing, not the names on a tree. Which raises a harder question, one that the crest on the wall can't answer. What happens when the rest of the Blacks, the ones who didn't die or disown themselves, decide they're not done choosing either? What if, what then? Tracing the thematic threads of Hermione Black. Because once the other Blacks start choosing, we have to step back and ask, what exactly are they choosing in this timeline? A name? A legacy? Or the girl who has been quietly rewriting both since she was 11 and answered to Granger instead of Black? At its core, this AU hangs on one audacious counterfactual. What if the brightest witch of her age wasn't a Muggle-born at all, but Sirius Black's secret daughter, stolen by a terrified ministry after his arrest, quietly placed with the Grangers, and raised in suburbia with no knowledge of ancient tapestries or cursed heirlooms? This isn't a story about a pure-blood princess pampered into arrogance. It's a story about a child whose life is deliberately rewritten, who grows up believing she has no power but the power she earns, and who later chooses to reclaim the Black name on her own fiercely negotiated terms. This changes everything, not because blood suddenly makes Hermione important, but because the revelation forces us to interrogate what blood has been doing in the background of canon all along. Does lineage dictate destiny, or only the expectations that get strapped to a child's back? What happens when an institution, the ministry that should protect her, decides her very existence is inconvenient and rearranges her timeline to suit its narrative? And when love enters that equation, Granger love with its packed lunches and revision timetables, Sirius's ragged, desperate love from Azkaban, the chosen family love of Harry Rom, and the Order, whose version of Hermione wins. We can trace her emotional arc through the same touchstones we know, now charged with new meaning. In the Shrieking Shack, the girl who thinks she's just a Muggle-born overachiever suddenly finds that the man she's helping to exonerate is also the father the ministry stole. Her horror at injustice stops being abstract. It's personal, carved into her birth certificate. At Grimmauld Place, the house that once spat out blood traitor, at Sirius now has to accommodate Hermione Black, the heir who alphabetizes the library, scrubs away dark artifacts, and uses the Black Vaults to fund legal aid for Muggle-borns. Malfoy Manor becomes another pivot. When Bellatrix carves into her arm, she's not just torturing a Muggle-born. She's defacing the hidden heiress of her own house. Heroism here comes from deprivation, years of being dismissed as lesser, and from abundance, from the moment Hermione realizes she can weaponize black gold and black political clout against the very ideology that produced her. At the Battle of Hogwarts, she stands on the ramparts carrying two worlds in her name, Granger and Black, outsider and insider, and uses that tension to argue for systemic change rather than simple victory. So, let's explore what this means for the wider story. If Hermione Black can turn the most infamous pure blood line into a legal and financial shield for the vulnerable, what happens to the entire conversation about blood purity and belonging? What if the House of Black, through her, becomes proof that inheritance is raw material, not a sentence? As we move into the closing reflection, The question isn't just who Hermione is in this universe. It's what her existence says about who anyone is allowed to become when love, not lineage, has the final word. Turning back to canon, why this AU changes how we read Hermione forever. And here's where we turn back to canon and, quietly, everything tilts. Because once you've held this what if in your hands, Hermione as a black heir, Hermione as the child the Ministry filed away, you can't quite look at the girl on the Hogwarts Express the same way again. In canon, she storms into the compartment with bushy hair, a prefect's voice in training, and a spine made of pure principle. She is Muggle-born, we're told. She is an outsider, we're told. But imagine now that every time she spits out the word mudblood, with that fierce, shaking contempt, you can feel the shadow of a different surname behind it. This isn't a story about replacing canon. It's about sharpening it, putting her choices in even higher relief. Think about her defense of Muggle-borns in Chamber of Secrets, poring over library books while everyone else whispers about the heir of Slytherin. Think about her founding SPEW, her stubborn refusal to accept that house elf bondage is just how the world works. In the AU, those moments read as a black heir burning down her own inheritance. In canon, they already mean she is standing in the middle of a blood-soaked timeline and insisting that worth is earned, not inherited. The difference is perspective, not purpose. Because even without the Black Vaults, Hermione's story is about rewriting legacy. She walks into a world obsessed with family trees and comes armed with exam scores, ethics, and a bottomless capacity for care. She takes the old laws about blood, about creatures, about who counts, and she keeps trying to bend them toward mercy. AU Hermione reclaims the black name. Canon Hermione does something just as radical. She proves you can come from nowhere, have no ancient magic at your back, and still change how power talks about itself. So, let's explore what happens if you carry this thought experiment into your next reread or rewatch. Every time Hermione mentions blood, remember the tapestry in Grimmauld Place and ask, what if her name was stitched there? Every time she quotes Hogwarts, a history, imagine she's also unknowingly footnoting the House of Black when she argues with Fudge, with Umbridge, with Scrimgeour. Listen for the girl who could have been a pure-blood princess and chose to be a conscience instead. This changes everything not because canon is secretly hiding this twist, but because it invites us to see how much of her arc is already about choosing found family over imposed lineage. How does it shift your feelings about Sirius, about the Ministry's quiet cruelties, about what the House of Black could have been if someone like her had held the ring sooner? If you want, share that with us. Tell us in the comments whether this AU makes you grieve Sirius differently, whether it softens or sharpens your view of pure-blood culture, and which other character-centric what-ifs you'd like to see pulled apart with this same emotionally grounded lens. And then, one last image. Hermione at a kitchen table. Maybe it's the Granger's laminate in a quiet Muggle suburb. Maybe it's the scarred wood of Grimmauld Place, surrounded by books, quill in hand, not a line on a ministry form, not a name on a family tree, a girl writing her own story at last, and through her, a legacy that finally learns how to love. Bonus angle. If Dumbledore had told her sooner, but what if that kitchen table scene had come years earlier? What if the ink on Hermione's first Hogwarts letter was barely dry when Dumbledore sat the Grangers down and said calmly that their daughter was also Sirius Black's. This changes everything. Not because it magically fixes the hurt, but because it shifts where the fractures form and how early the healing has to begin. Imagine first-year Hermione on the Hogwarts Express, not just anxious about house points and spell pronunciation, but rehearsing a different secret. I'm Muggle-raised, but I'm also heir to a house that once toasted Voldemort. If Dumbledore tells her in first or second year, the benefits are obvious at first glance. Sirius, even from Azkaban, isn't just a mad murderer in the Prophet. He's her missing father, and that means Dumbledore has to treat his imprisonment as a personal injustice, not a convenient silence. Letters are preserved, memories are shared. When Sirius escapes in Prisoner of Azkaban, Hermione doesn't have to make that shrieking shack leap of faith on logic alone. She has a name, a history, a claim. An earlier bond with Sirius means the trio suddenly has access to Black family resources long before Grimmauld Place becomes headquarters. A library steeped in ancient runes and obscure protections. A vault that can bankroll legal challenges to Fudge's smear campaign. A pureblood surname that makes Umbridge's smile go tight around the edges. When the Ministry tries to discredit Harry in 5th year, Hermione Black Granger standing beside him means something very different on the front page. But because this isn't a story about painless revelations, we have to look at the cost. A first-year Hermione, already bearing the weight of being the brightest witch of her age, now has to carry the knowledge that her bloodline is a battleground. Every essay on Muggle-born rights becomes a quiet act of rebellion against her own ancestors. Every time Malfoy sneers mudblood, she knows he's technically wrong and symbolically right. And that contradiction cuts. There's another risk. If she knows she is the Black heir from the beginning, does she lean too hard on that privilege? In second year, does she argue with McGonagall about the Chamber of Secrets as a concerned student, or as a Black asserting her right to be heard? In fourth year, does she negotiate with Rita Skeeter as a clever girl with a jarred beetle, or as a political player who understands that her surname can ruin reputations as effectively as any article? And then there's danger. A known Black heir raised Muggle? To Death Eaters, she isn't just an enemy, she's an insult, a living repudiation of everything the Tapestry stands for. The Department of Mysteries doesn't just want a prophecy, they want leverage. Kidnapping Hermione becomes both strategic and symbolic. So, let's explore the heart of this mini what-if. There is no timeline where the truth doesn't hurt. Tell her early, and you give her more time to grow into her power. But you also steal more of her childhood. Tell her late, and you protect her innocence a little longer, but you compress the grief, the anger, the identity crisis into a sharper, more explosive arc. This Harry has already taught us that changing one decision at the start reverberates through every corridor at Hogwarts. Hermione's heritage works the same way. You can move the revelation forward or back, but the core remains, a girl standing between two worlds, choosing what family means on her own terms. And here's where the timeline starts to branch again. If she knows in first year, does she still punch Draco in third? Or does she dismantle him with a cool, black-flavored threat? Does she still take the Time Turner in third year? Or does Dumbledore decide the heir to an ancient house is too politically precious to risk? When the Battle of Hogwarts comes, is she on the front lines? Or is she the rallying banner pure-blood defectors gather around? We're not going to answer all of those questions here. Instead, hold that earlier revelation Hermione in your mind for a moment. Smaller, more scared, already calculating. Then ask yourself, if Dumbledore played his cards differently, who else at Hogwarts might have changed sides long before the final battle even began? Bonus angle: Hermione Black in Slytherin House. So let's pull the camera back to that first feast and do something very simple that, in practice, detonates the whole timeline. What if, when the hat slid down over Hermione's curls, it didn't hear Gryffindor first? What if it heard Black? In canon, Hermione's protests, "Not Slytherin, not Slytherin," belong to Harry. Here, the words are hers, sharp and panicked, because she has already read about Slytherin House, already mapped it onto pure blood supremacy and the family she thinks abandoned her. The hat listens. It weighs nurture against bloodline, fear against potential, and then, very quietly, it decides that ambition sharpened by conscience is exactly what Slytherin needs. This changes everything, not because green and silver magically corrupt her, but because every corridor conversation, every shared class, every late-night argument in the common room now runs through a different set of alliances. Hermione Black still cares about house elves and Muggle-born safety and resisting Voldemort. She just reaches for subtler tools. Canon Hermione attacks injustice head-on: knitted hats, SBU badges, righteous speeches in the Gryffindor common room. Slytherin Hermione watches who laughs and who looks away. She memorizes which purebloods flinch at the word mudblood and which only pretend to. When she drafts her first proposal for house elf protections, she doesn't start with moral outrage. She starts with numbers. How much unpaid labor props up Hogwarts? How vulnerable that makes the school to sabotage. Then she lets those figures accidentally circulate among ambitious Slytherins who want to protect their own future careers. Instead of founding a student society no one joins, she brokers quiet deals. A prefect agrees to stop using slurs in exchange for Hermione fixing his arithmancy essay. A seventh year, half terrified of his Death Eater parents, passes her rumors from Nocturne Alley. She learns to smile at Draco Malfoy across the table and file away every careless admission for later. That relationship becomes its own battleground. To Draco, Hermione Black is a paradox. The perfect, pure-blood pedigree. The worst possible ideology. She is everything he was taught to value and everything he was raised to hate. One week, they are dueling in the corridor, hexes snapping against stone. The next, they are partners in potions, their combined precision making even Snape pause. And Snape does pause. This isn't a story about him softening overnight, but because Hermione is a Black who reads ahead, who understands old magic and inheritance law, he can't quite dismiss her as a foolish Gryffindor. There is a wary respect there, edged with fear that she might become either his greatest ally or his most dangerous student. Across the hall, Harry and Ron have to make a different choice. Do they let house lines harden, or do they keep seeking out the bossy Slytherin girl who helped them with that troll? Friendship comes slower through shared detentions, midnight research in the library, and the realization that Slytherin's resident Black heir is quietly sabotaging her own house's darker currents from within. The thematic payoff is sharp. A Black raised by Grangers, sorted into Slytherin, using cunning to protect the vulnerable, makes it impossible to pretend that green and silver are inherently dark. It means the question shifts from what if Hermione were secretly a black to who is Hermione when blood, upbringing, and house identity all pull in different directions. And once you've seen her in green and silver, you can't unsee the possibilities. What if she sways half her house before Voldemort returns? What if she walks into the Wizengamot one day as Lady Black, with a block of former Slytherins at her back? So let's explore where that kind of power, wielded differently, might take the war next. Bonus angle if Voldemort claimed the Black Heiress. But what if that power had been intercepted before she ever reached a Hogwarts common room? What if the Black Heiress never had the chance to choose at all? Imagine a slightly skewed timeline. Pettigrew, skulking in some safe house, hears whispers about an exceptional Muggle-born called Granger. He does the arithmetic on her age, on the timing of Sirius's arrest. On a sealed birth record he half remembers from pure blood gossip. And instead of sitting on it, he scurries straight to Voldemort with the news that the House of Black may have an unclaimed daughter walking around under Dumbledore's nose. This changes everything, because now Hermione isn't just a clever nuisance, she's a resource. So when the raid comes, say in 4th year, under cover of the chaos of the Quidditch World Cup aftermath, or in 5th year, when the Ministry is busy denying Voldemort's return, it isn't random. It's targeted. We picture masked Death Eaters not just sowing terror, but moving with a list in hand. And near the top is Hermione Granger. In canon, she escapes these moments through luck, courage, and proximity to Harry. In this timeline, one misstep, one separated corridor, and she doesn't make it back to the tent or to Grimmauld Place. She vanishes. What would Voldemort do with a Black Heiress raised Muggle-born? First, propaganda. He parades her as proof that even the most wayward blood can be redeemed by his new order. A twisted answer to the Muggle-loving Weasleys and Dumbledore. Second, leverage. A living bargaining chip against Sirius, against any surviving Blacks, against the Order as a whole. Surrender or watch the last scion of an ancient family broken on my terms. And third, education. He offers her a perverse apprenticeship, access to the Black Grimoire, to forbidden libraries, to the very runes and arithmancy she loves, but framed as weapons in his war. This isn't a story about Hermione snapping overnight. Even in captivity, her Granger ethics and Black stubbornness lock together into something quiet and unyielding. She nods when she must, memorizes everything, and files away every weakness she sees. She refuses to denounce Muggle-borns on cue, so he punishes her. She refuses to call him my lord with real belief. So he tries subtler routes, isolating her, dangling the idea that her true family rejected her. But because she has already built a family with Harry, with Ron, with Sirius in this AU, those attempts land on stone. Meanwhile, what happens to the trio? Harry and Ron become a two-man rescue mission, reckless and raw. Every scheme is now measured against one question. Does this bring Hermione home faster? The Order fractures over how far to negotiate. Dumbledore weighs prophecy against a single girl's life. Sirius is torn between charging in wand blazing and playing the long game his daughter would demand. The war's tempo accelerates because Voldemort has forced everyone's hand. And in the darkest version, Hermione is the one who alters the script from inside, smuggling information out, sabotaging rituals, turning the propaganda of the Black Heiress into a slow, corrosive doubt among Voldemort's followers. She may not escape immediately, but she refuses to be claimed. So, let's explore what that contrast tells us. Our main timeline's delicate balance. Hermione free, choosing her house, claiming the black name on her own terms, rests on a handful of near misses and hidden choices. One intercepted owl, one raid gone differently, and the ideology she spends her life fighting could have marched under her banner. Which means when we watch her walk into the Wizengamot as Lady Black in this AU, we're not just seeing power, we're seeing the narrow, hard-won miracle of a girl who remained herself. And if her freedom is that fragile, what happens when the rest of Wizarding Britain finally learns who she really is and realizes how close they came to losing her to the dark entirely? Bonus angle: the Grangers in the Wizarding world. So what happens when that revelation doesn't just crack open the Wizengamot, but a quiet, semi-detached house in Crawley? What if the secret heir to the House of Black doesn't walk into this war alone, but brings her parents with her? This isn't a story about Hermione being torn neatly in two, Black versus Granger, Wizard versus Muggle, because once the truth is out, the Grangers have a choice, and in this AU they refuse to stay on the sidelines. They move, maybe into a renovated, aggressively decursed wing of Grimmauld Place, maybe into a small wizarding cul-de-sac down the road from Diagon Alley. But either way, they bring their dental surgery, their waiting room magazines, and their very firm belief in fluoride right along with them. This changes everything. Imagine the culture shock running both directions. Witches who have brewed Skellygrow for decades, staring in fascinated horror at an injection of local anesthetic. Wizards who think a quick Scourgify is sufficient, being handed a soft-bristled toothbrush and a stern lecture about plaque. In the other direction, you have Emma Granger stepping into the flu for the first time, emerging from a fireplace in San Mungo's, soot-streaked and breathless, and immediately asking where the emergency exits are. You have Mr. Granger opening a howler by mistake and nearly fainting when Molly Weasley's voice fills the entire street. Hermione becomes the interpreter, and not just linguistically. She's the one explaining to Sirius why her dad flinches when someone mentions Azkaban, because prison means something very different in his world. She's the one translating Wizarding War headlines into terms her parents understand, then turning around and translating her parents' horror into sharp, inconvenient questions at order meetings. Why are soul-sucking monsters used as prison guards? Why is it legal to own sentient beings? Why is blood traitor still a word anyone can say without being hexed on the spot? The Grangers' moral clarity cuts through centuries of pure blood rationalization. They don't care that it's always been done this way. They care that a child was left with abusive relatives for the sake of wards, that house elves have no pay or freedom, that Muggle-borns can be obliviated for seeing the wrong thing. In canon, Hermione often feels like a lone voice shouting into a storm. Here, she has a chorus, two Muggles with clipboards and consent forms who keep asking, very calmly, why the wizarding world accepts the unacceptable. And it helps her, viscerally, because she no longer has to choose between Granger and Black. Her parents eat breakfast at the same long table as Remus and Tonks. Her mum swaps recipes with Andromeda. Her dad and Arthur Weasley argue cheerfully over plug sockets. The House of Black becomes a literal blended household, a place where toothbrushes sit next to self-stirring cauldrons on the bathroom shelf. The hopeful thread of this AU tightens here. The future Hermione is fighting for isn't pure-blood supremacy or Muggle assimilation. It's something new, built at the intersection. A world where a Muggle dentist can treat a half-goblin's toothache, where a former Death Eater's heir campaigns to outlaw Dementors, where Muggle-born stops being a slur and starts being a bridge. And if one Muggle family can move into the heart of Wizarding London and refuse to be background characters, what happens when others follow? Bonus angle: Creature's redemption under a different mistress. If Muggles can move into Diagon Alley and refuse to be background characters, what happens when the oldest servant in Grimmauld Place quietly refuses? One day, to be background either? Because in this timeline, Creature's arc is not a footnote to Sirius's temper or a convenient deus ex machina at the Battle of Hogwarts. This changes everything we think we know about him. What if the secret daughter of Sirius Black doesn't just inherit his house, his vaults, and his enemies, but also his most damaged legacy, a house elf who has only ever known cruelty, commands, and the warped comfort of pure blood ideology? Canon Creature clings to the past because it is all he has. Here, he still mutters about blood traitors and mudbloods, still polishes the Black family tree as if it were scripture. But the moment Hermione becomes mistress of Grimmauld Place, the script shifts. This isn't a story about a girl who fixes a servant with kindness and wins his loyalty like a prize. It's a story about what happens when someone raised Muggle, steeped in SPEW pamphlets and union rhetoric, is suddenly responsible for the bondage of another person. So, let's explore that first conversation. Hermione, now legally a Black and technically Creature's owner, stands in the gloomy kitchen and does the most un-Black thing imaginable. She offers him wages. She explains days off. She lays out in careful, lawyerly language that he can refuse to iron socks, that he can visit Hogwarts or the Hogwarts kitchens, that his work has value and should be chosen, not compelled. Creature is horrified. Paid? Time away from the house? The old magic of service? The chains built into his very sense of self? Recoil. He refuses. Again and again, not because he loves slavery, but because he cannot yet imagine himself outside it. And yet he obeys. At first he obeys because she is Black, by blood and by law, because the ancient bond recognizes her as mistress, and his body moves before his mind can protest. But because Hermione insists on explaining every order, because she thanks him, because she apologizes when she snaps, and then corrects herself, another kind of loyalty begins to grow. He watches her invite Muggle-borns and half-bloods to Sirius's old table. He watches her argue in the Wizengamot against house elf abuse while wearing the Black signet ring. He watches her use the power he was trained to revere in order to dismantle the hierarchies that made him small. The turning point is quiet. One morning, during a rare lull between order meetings and legal battles, Hermione tells him he may take the day and do as he pleases. No agenda, no suggested core, no hidden test. Hours later, she comes back to find Creature in the kitchen, not working, but sitting, not in the corner, at the table. There is an empty chair between Harry and Ginny. Creature has chosen the one beside Hermione. No one invited him. No one ordered him. He simply climbed up, knees awkward, eyes downcast, and stayed when no punishment came. It is a small thing, a cup of tea, a shared silence, a muttered comment about how Master Regulus would have liked the new curtains. But in that moment, Creature is no longer only a black relic. He is a person tentatively claiming space. And if an elf whose very magic was written in chains can begin to sit at the table, what happens when the rest of the Black Legacy decides to stand up as well? Bonus angle. Snape's memories with a black-blooded Hermione. And that brings us to the one person who spent his whole life insisting he wanted nothing to do with Blacks or Gryffindors, or hopeful children. Severus Snape. When we revisit the Shrieking Shack and the boathouse in this timeline, Snape's dying gift to Harry still begins with the same instruction. Take it, take it. The silver threads still pour into the vial. But because Hermione is black-blooded here, those memories don't just belong to Lily. They carry the shadow of another girl with wild hair and a spine of iron, whose very existence keeps puncturing Snape's carefully maintained bitterness. What if, when Harry tips himself into the Pensieve, he doesn't only see the childhood by the river and the word mudblood? What if, between Lily's laughter and the dark mark, we get a flicker of Snape in his office, overhearing two masked Death Eaters whispering about the Granger girl and a lesson for blood traitors? In canon, Snape's protection of students is sharp-edged and often invisible. Here, we watch him move, a quiet alteration to a rota, a suggestion to Dumbledore that Hermione be sent to the library with Hagrid at precisely the right hour, a cold, silky threat, delivered in a corridor that makes a junior Death Eater go pale and change targets. This isn't a story about Snape suddenly becoming soft. It's about a man who knows exactly what the pureblood world can do to children, refusing to let it happen again. He cannot save Lily. He could not save himself. But he can, in small, furious ways, protect this girl who was both Muggle-raised and ancient magic, both Granger and Black. Then the memory shifts. Pattern interrupt. No teenage Snape, no swirling cloaks, just grim old place, dim and claustrophobic after Hermione's heritage is revealed. Sirius and Snape stand in the kitchen, the same room where Creature has begun to sit at the table. Voices low, wands holstered, tempers anything but. Sirius insists Hermione will choose her own path, that the House of Black will finally stand for Muggle-borns and house elves and all the people his parents despised. Snape, eyes narrowed, answers that the name Black is a weapon, and weapons either get wielded responsibly or fall into the Dark Lord's hands. In that argument, we hear something startling. Snape's grudging belief that Hermione could redeem the Black name in a way Sirius never managed. She is disciplined where Sirius is reckless, strategic where he is impulsive. She is, painfully, what Snape once imagined Lily might have been with the right power behind her. For Harry, watching, this changes everything. He still sees the boy who loved his mother, but he also sees the man who, in teaching Hermione nonverbal spells early, in docking points instead of writing to the ministry, in arguing for her training as a political heir, was caring for her as a proxy. For Lily, for his own younger self, for every child crushed between bloodlines and war. So, let's explore what that means. It means this timeline refuses simple categories. Death Eater, Order member, blood traitor, Black heir. Everyone is more entangled with Hermione's story than they wanted to admit. And as the Pensieve empties and Harry surfaces, gasping, he doesn't just carry Snape's love and remorse. He carries a new understanding that Hermione's very existence has been quietly bending loyalties, even in the coldest heart, all along. Epilogue. AU. 19 years later, on platform 9 3/4. So what does all of that Pensieve revelation actually buy the future? What does it mean 19 years later, when the war is a history essay instead of a prophecy hanging over a boy's head? We're back at King's Cross. Steam curls around ankles, owls complain in their cages, and children clutch trunks that look far too big for them. Canon gives us this scene, but here the camera lingers on something different. A deep, woven scarf in maroon and gold, and near the fringe, a discreet silver crest, a rearing black dog, stitched so small you'd miss it unless you knew to look. The House of Black wrapped around Hermione's throat, not as a chain, but as a choice. In one hand, she holds the handle of a trolley. In the other, a folded Daily Prophet whose front page headline reads, "New Creators Rights Bill. Passes. Black Heiress leads reform." There's a photo of her in Wisengamot robes, hair only slightly tamed, speaking with that familiar ferocity. This isn't a story about Hermione slipping quietly back into anonymity once Voldemort falls. This Hermione has spent nearly 2 decades turning bloodline into leverage, and leverage into law. Her children orbit her in messy, overlapping circles. One, Rose, in this timeline still Ron's daughter, and still Hermione's, is arguing with Hugo about whether the Hogwarts Express could be converted to run on Muggle solar technology. She has a notebook full of diagrams, equations, scrawled in both arithmancy notation and ordinary physics. Another child, dark-haired and adopted after the war from a half-blood family shattered by Death Eater reprisals, is tracing the ancient runes etched into their new wand, murmuring translations under their breath. Black curiosity, Granger discipline, and something entirely their own. They've all grown up hearing that blood is history, not destiny, that you catalogue it the way you'd catalogue a library. Useful context, never a verdict. Behind them, a younger, pure-blood couple hesitates. The father nudges his son, nodding toward Hermione with a whisper. That's the head of House Black. There's a tiny beat where, in another timeline, the boy might have flinched. Here, he squints, recognition dawning. She's the one who changed the house elf laws, he says, half awed, half matter of fact. Professor Binns said old families fought her for years. And just like that, the title that once meant dark prestige now means Labour hearings, voting blocks, and liberation. Harry arrives with his own cluster of red-haired and black-haired children, and for a moment, the platform noise recedes. He catches Hermione's eye as their kids haul trunks toward the train. No words, because they don't need them. This changes everything hangs between them anyway, not because the war didn't break them. It did, but because they've managed to build something past it. They were weapons once. Now they're parents sending the next generation into a castle that is, for the first time in centuries, more school than battleground. The whistle blows, doors slam, small faces crowd the windows, some framed by Weasley freckles, some by black sharp cheekbones, some by neither, all of them threaded into the same wider family. As the Hogwarts Express pulls away, red and gold against the fog, it carries children who have grown up hearing that the name Black once stood for terror and now stands for treaties. Children for whom a girl like Hermione can be heir and reformer without apology. And somewhere in that blur of waving hands, the old rigid story of blood purity finally disappears around the bend. Your turn at the quill, inviting you into the timeline. So what if that train disappearing into the fog isn't an ending at all, but just one branch in an endless tangle of tracks? In this timeline, we asked one specific, dangerous question. What if the brightest witch of her age wasn't a Muggle-born at all, but the stolen daughter of Sirius Black? And we followed that thread all the way through Hogwarts, the war, and the uneasy peace that comes after. This changes everything. Not because blood suddenly matters more than the Muggle-born brilliance canon gives her, but because shifting that one axis, parentage, belonging, the house that claims her, rearranges how every choice lands. Yet even here, with treaties signed and Grimmauld Place hanging new portraits, we're only looking at one version. One Hermione who waits until third year to learn the truth. One sorting that still puts her in Gryffindor. One war that bends, but doesn't quite break, in familiar places. What if the lie cracked earlier in first year and the girl on the troll's bathroom floor already knew she was Black? What if the hat, hearing Sirius's daughter, sent her to Slytherin, and the dungeons had to make room for a bossy, Muggle-raised heir who refuses to sneer at anyone? What if Azkaban left Sirius darker, harsher, and Hermione chose to walk away from him? This isn't a story about the definitive Hermione Black. It's one map in a whole constellation of possible routes. So, we want to hand you the quill. Which moment in this version hit you hardest? Was it the shrieking shack, when her hand hovered a second longer before taking Sirius's? Because the word father is heavier than godfather. Was it Grimmauld Place? Old wards flaring and peeling back years of neglect as the house recognized its lost mistress? Was it Bellatrix, eyes wild, hissing cousin in the Department of Mysteries, and realizing the girl who defies her isn't an interloper, but family come to overthrow her? How do those beats change the way you see canon Hermione when you go back to the books? Tell us in the comments where the timeline twisted something open for you, and if your brain is already racing ahead, good. Write the scene where McGonagall delivers a baby to the Granger's door. Sketch Hermione Black standing between Creature and a Muggle-born first year. Pull apart the politics of a House of Black heir campaigning for House Elf rights. Or pitch the next experiment. A Neville raised by Andromeda, a Snape who keeps custody of Harry, a Ginny who grows up with a wand that chooses differently. Because under all the ancient magic and tangled bloodlines, this was never only about sigils and vaults. It's about the right to know who you are, and the power to decide what that will mean once you do. Family by blood, family by choice, family by sheer, stubborn love. If you've walked this alternate path with us all the way to the end, you're part of that experiment now. Carry Hermione Black with you back into canon, and then come back and tell us, in your version of the story, what happens next.